My name is Nick Ashton. I am the Senior Vice President for Exploration in Norway and UK in Equinor, based in Stavanger. Beside me, my colleague on the chair is Isabel Billa from Total, the VP for Exploration in North Sea and Russia. We have an exciting agenda today. We will have two framing context sessions at the start from the UK and from Norwegian perspectives. And then we'll move in to talks from the rest of the panel from various different oil and gas companies, talking through exploration in Europe, talking portfolio, technology in a European context. So I'm looking forward to this session.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So we'll, in terms of the agenda, we will start with, as Nick mentioned, with a framing introduction. And we will split our morning into two, and we'll have a short break before we get started with the technology and digitalization. So we encourage you to stay in the room until the break, if it's possible for you. So we will get started this morning with Nick Richardson from OGA. So Nick, please, if you can plan. So Nick is the head of exploration and new venture for the OGA, so Oil and Gas Authority in the UK. This is the Oil and Gas UK regulator. Is responsible for managing the UK portfolio and exploration, including appraisal, prospective resources, and is doing this with his team through geoanalytics, supported by subsurface technical operations and studies. So Nick will provide some insights on the regulator perspective. And I guess we will probably touch also what OGA has achieved to really rejuvenate and encourage the industry to invest. And you have all seen it has been quite successful with the last round. So Nick, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. I'm going to give you a story of how the Oil and Gas Authority really came into existence. And I think we've got lots of interest now from regulators and from industry, and trying to use what we've been doing as a template for other regulators around the world, and for how other regions can use us as, I guess, an impetus to improve some actions that might stimulate activity elsewhere in the world. So I'm going to start off by looking backwards to 2014. This was a really difficult moment for the UK continental shelf. We had many problems. We had really high operating costs in the region. Production efficiency was really low, so assets were not being maintained very well. There wasn't really a focus on delivery. Martin can maybe tell you more about this later. I don't know whether he wants to chip in at some point, but there was a real low and a real depression in the industry. Exploration was certainly at an all-time low. Everybody thought, oh my goodness, this is the end. And lots of people decided they would pack up their bags and leave, essentially. In terms of the fiscal regime, there was a big problem here. So the Treasury within the UK, so the government, basically had a history of putting tax rates up and down depending on the oil price. And so nobody really had any faith in the fiscal regime, whether they could make a decent profit margin at all. So obviously that was something that needed to be fixed. There was in some areas a lack of vision, so what was the long-term strategy? Did we have the right leaders in place who could drive change? I would say no, in many areas we didn't. Commercially, there was a viper's nest. So we had many cases of dysfunctional joint venture groups, where one group within that group was working against another group, or one party wanted to basically extract as much value out of the other joint venture partner as they could. So there was a real feeling of mistrust in some of those groupings. We had a looming decommissioning headache in the North Sea, so aging infrastructure, production was down on many fields. What on earth could we do about that? There was a cost to the state as well because of the way the tax system had been set up with release from the government. Many assets in the wrong hands, Companies did not want to maintain them, and the technology simply outdated. We had facilities held up by scaffold poles offshore, and some safety issues that came with that as well. So that's when Sir Ian Wood came onto the scene. He was commissioned by the government to do a review of industry, and he spent a lot of time going around to different people in oil and gas companies, in the supply chain itself, and asking, well, what are the problems and what on earth can we do about this? And then he, out of that process, published a groundbreaking report. Now, it was published at a time of very high oil price. It was published when costs were high in the basin, but many of the recommendations are still valid today. So they're still valid where the oil price has come down. They're still valid where costs have come down significantly. Many of the actions that were proposed in there, I think, could be picked up by anybody and applied to their regulatory business. So one of the key recommendations was the formation of the Oil and Gas Authority. And the Oil and Gas Authority is quite different from other regulators in the sense that it is not controlled by the government. We have a shareholder in the government, but we do not have a political influence behind us. So we're an arm's length body. So we get to set our own destiny, essentially. We have a board of directors. They decide what we should be doing, and they set targets for us. So we're one of the few regulators in the world with targets. Now, relating to production as well, you can see in the top right-hand side there, falling production across Northwest Europe, particularly in the UK, so massive, massive drop. What could we do about that? And we really had to work between government, regulator and industry to resolve these problems, which required lots and lots of collaborative efforts. So we had to step back and say, well, what are the factors influencing investment? I'd still say that geology is probably the biggest one if you're working across borders and trying to attract investment, but there are many others on there. Fiscal terms is obviously critically important, and lots of effort went into changing the fiscal terms, making it much, much more attractive. We're now seeing companies coming into the basin again and saying we can see the value proposition because taxes have gone down. We've put investment allowances in place. There have been incentives targeted in certain areas, and we've resolved some of the decommissioning transfer issues as well. And so if you look on the right-hand side there, policy perception, Norway's always had a good perception in terms of policy. UK is moving up the list as time goes on, and hopefully we can get to the top of that list. I don't want to say bad things about Norway. We've learned lots and lots of good lessons from our Norwegian colleagues across the border, particularly on how to deal with data, how to work with companies, and being involved in partner meetings as well. So we set out a vision for the Oil and Gas Authority. We set out a vision with industry for the future. What should it look like? And not just in terms of trying to increase production, or at least arrest its fall over time, but also to work with the supply chain and try to increase the value that could be derived from the industry and from exports as well. So this has resulted in a thing called the sector deal that we're working up, so working on transformational technologies, which I'll come back to later, underwater engineering and decommissioning in particular, and then as an organisation we have a number of sector strategies which are published on our website. We also have guidance for industry. We make it much more clear what we expect, and I think that's a great thing for industry, knowing where they stand. We can have those hard conversations with industry because they know what we expect of them. We have something very important to us, the stewardship regime I'll come back to. We publish much, much more data as well, so targeted data sets, but also subsurface data sets are increasingly coming into play. So asset stewardship, what does that mean? It's essentially trying to shepherd industry along in the right direction, getting everybody to work together. There are four main components to this. There's benchmarking, so we look at how companies are performing. We tell them how they're performing relative to their peers. We have stewardship reviews, so we sit down with companies at different levels and we look at their activities and how we can help them along. We have industry surveys, so every year we ask industry questions through a survey to find out how they're performing, what their plans are. And then on the top right-hand side there, a really critical aspect, stewardship expectations. So these are set out in 10 areas. For those who are working in exploration and appraisal, the ones that are most pertinent are 2, 3, and 4 on there. So we look at how are the work programs developing, how has performance been in terms of pre- and post-well analysis. Are companies using the optimum data sets? So do they have modern, good quality seismic data? Are they reprocessing that data on a regular interval? And we also try to work on work program delivery. So this has been a really particular problem in the UK, is trying to get companies to deliver what they've promised on time. As a result of that, we worked with industry to change the licensing regime quite significantly. There was a real change in attitude. Rather than trying to get companies to shoehorn their work programs into a fixed duration license, we said, well, you tell us how you want to design your license. Tell us how long you need for the optimal work program, and then we'll allow you to do that. But you have to stick to your promises. If you say you're going to deliver a seismic survey by 2021, we expect you to do that. So really we're holding industry to account on their promises, and if they don't stick to those promises, then ultimately they can be removed from a license so we can bring somebody else in. But we also have a series of new powers as well. So if companies are not carrying out the right actions, we intervene, we give them warnings, and then ultimately we can fine those companies. So these expectations are really important. They set out good industry practice. I think any region in the world could pick them up, and we're starting to see our colleagues in other regulators around the world take these expectations and adapt them for their own purposes. And they will probably evolve slightly over time, so we're in a constant listening mode with industry. Next element, which is increasingly coming into play for us, is resource progression. So how can we push resources through the maturation funnel? Now, one key part of this is license turnover. Recently, we closed the 30th licensing round, which was massively subscribed with applications. We made a number of awards out of that, so 123 licenses we've been able to award. 61 companies with really great diversity in there. So we've got the super majors in there all the way down to very small companies. So we have an entire ecosystem working on the front end of exploration. So they may be doing very low-level work programs, but things that larger companies would not do. And then they can take those ideas and sell them into the larger companies. Also, we're seeing the larger companies refocus their efforts. So you may see on the news that they're moving out of certain facilities that don't make sense to them strategically, but they are then going elsewhere in the UKCS, and particularly we're seeing companies move to the west of Shetlands. Resource maturation, you can see on the top right-hand side there, we're tracking very carefully what is in the inventory, so in terms of leads, prospects and plays, all the way through to undeveloped discoveries, trying to push some of those smaller discoveries that sit out there through that funnel. And then project execution as well, very important. So if you come down to the bottom right there are a number of active projects through the UKCS. We have 14 or so that we hope to get through to sanction this year. We have line of sight to 48 or so other projects. So there's still lots and lots of activity on the UKCS. And then for me, particularly important is exploration and appraisal well delivery. We're not drilling enough wells to exploit the yet-to-find potential of the UKCS. So our published figures, 269 billion barrels yet to find. We're going to revise that number. There'll be an estimate published next year, which will really try to articulate where industry should be going to look for that yet-to-find potential, and then we'll be working with them to deliver that. So we're very keen on keeping up to date with companies' plans in terms of wells that are being planned, and make sure that there's enough coming through that funnel, which also supports the supply chain and a healthy, wider environment. And then collaboration, fundamentally important. So Sir Ian Wood was very, very keen on this. So commercial collaboration. We do some very interesting exercises now with industry where we get industry to look at their behavior. So we'll take one company, we'll ask them to fill out a survey and do a self-assessment on themselves. So how open are they? How well do they think they work with others? How sharing are they? And then we will do an assessment on that company. And then sometimes we'll also get their joint venture partners to do an assessment on them. And guess what? Sometimes the views are very, very disparate. So companies may think that they're fantastic and their partners have a completely different view. And they've never understood this. And often it's down to some very, very small things, small behavioral issues. Sometimes it's something more fundamental, like the legal framework that they're working in within their company, and they have certain barriers that need to be broken down. So that's a fascinating exercise. We've had a number of companies go through that. It's been a real eye-opener for them, and they're taking action to change their behaviours and restore some of these relationships within these joint ventures. Ultimately, if companies don't do the right things, we can use our powers. So they're on there, but we've only ever gotten to the early stages of using our powers. Often where we pick up the phone to somebody and say there's a problem, it's often quickly resolved. In the middle there, area plans. We get joint ventures and joint ventures in regions to get together, sit round a table and work out how they're going to best exploit the resources in a particular area, how they're going to best use the infrastructure. So this is very much an industry-owned process now. So we set the ground rules, we put them in a room together and we let them thrash it out. And we try to get them to create value for themselves and for the UK itself. And then on the right-hand side there, we have a team that works with the supply chain. So trying to get companies to be more mindful of the supply chain, new ways of working, trying to set up contracts in the right way, mutually beneficial arrangements, and a real focus on this is also in decommissioning area. So we have a very big decommissioning challenge in the UKCS, not just from an environmental perspective, but also from a cost perspective. How can we get those costs down? How can we carry out decommissioning in the most efficient way? So really trying to increase the total value to everybody who works within the industry. And then finally, what's the opportunity, the broader opportunity? So you can see on the top left there's the integration of lots and lots of different pieces that we have in a very well-established, mature basin, the UKCS. Decommissioning is very important to me as an exploration head. And so I need to work with my friends in decommissioning to know what the plans are of companies. You may see decommissioning timescales that are published. We're trying to push those out as far as possible, and they are moving. So every time we add some resources in a near-field prospect that then turns into a discovery, we push out the life of that field, we push out decommissioning, and we have an opportunity then to have a larger scale decommissioning effort at some point in the future and really work on how we're going to do that. So the graph on the top right there shows you the additional barrels that we've added through our actions in the yellow slug there. We think we can add another 2.8 billion barrels through the measures we've already put in place. But then there's even more that we can add. So we can increase recovery factors. We have EOR projects on the go. We have the area plans that should add another 4 billion barrels. And then we have the yet to find potential that we're working on as well. So lots of efforts, exploration through resource progression and into the decommissioning life cycle as well. But extending basin life is going to require lots of things. So efficiency, simplification, digital is really critical to us. Use of technology, collaboration, and most importantly, the people who actually do it and deliver that work for us. Okay, so if you want to talk to us, come and visit us on the stand as well. So we're tucked in the far back corner, as the regulators often are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was a very interesting start for us, revitalizing an industry. I now have the pleasure to introduce Gaute Eriksen. Gaute is the energy attaché for the Norwegian authorities in the EU. I think Gaute was a little bit worried he would provoke, and we encourage him to do so. This is not revitalizing an industry. This is a reality check for our industry. So please, Gaute, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I have understood that I should try to convey to you what is the EU thinking about energy looking forward. And being a Norwegian, I was thinking, why did you ask me about that? And you guys might think that I'm representing an NGO by the end of this presentation, but I'm not. My background is working with oil and gas issues in the Norwegian ministry. Now for 4 years, I have been posted in Brussels. And I guess the reason why I have been asked to come here and try to convey some of the way I see EU policy making is because that is my job. For the Norwegian government. So I'm trying to keep an ear to the ground. What is the EU thinking, and then engage in discussions with my colleagues. So I'm going to show you a picture, and the picture is already up there. I'm going to show you a chart, and I will also show you a question. And then I will try to see if it's possible to answer this question. And really, what I was planning to do was to speculate a bit what we might, what kind of targets the EU will define in a 2050 framework. But before we go to 2050, let me just dwell on some of the thinking in a 2030 perspective. Because my assessment when it comes for oil and gas, things changes quite a bit with those two different time frames. 2030, you're probably aware that the EU, they have set themselves different goals related to emission reductions. They want to reduce emissions by 40%. And then there is a discussion, what kind of targets should you have for sectoral policies to underpin such a target. And the two main sectoral policies is policies to really promote renewable energy and energy efficiency. And 3 o'clock this morning, while the rest of the space in this room were still partying perhaps, the different institutions in the EU, they agreed an agreement on what the renewable energy targets for 2030 should be. And from the EU member state, it started, they had a position on 27, but the result was 32. So what I observe is that it's a very clear drive in the EU to be ambitious on the climate side and to push the sectoral policies for renewables and energy efficiency. But still, of course, if you have a renewable target of 32, it means that you have the rest is something else. And the rest is then fossil fuels. And in that perspective, so I think as long as we're speaking about 2030, in particular gas is really helpful, because with gas you can actually push more renewables, because you will need backup capacity to handle the variation you get from solar and wind. And of course, it's not the only thing in the EU perspective about climate change and environmental concerns. Of course, when you speak about energy, energy security is key. And as a Norwegian, I think even the way they think about energy security in Poland and some of the Eastern European countries, I cannot even relate to it, because it's such a profound interest also in the sphere of energy. And then also the cost of energy. The cost of energy in terms of being competitive as industries, but also in terms of the consumer. 10%, I mean, there are figures there saying that 10% of the EU population, that they are energy poor. And energy poor, for instance, would mean that you don't have the purchasing power in winter to heat your home the way, so you have low temperature inside. And then you die earlier than you should. So energy poverty and keeping the cost of energy is also key when it comes to the EU policy making. So I would say from an oil and gas perspective, in a 2030 perspective, the outlook is quite good. And you also have the situation that domestic production is on decline. So I think really it's also to get domestic production to maintain as high as as possible. That fits very well in a 2030 perspective. Okay, so let's then move to 2050. And the European Commission, they will present a new strategy for 2050 this November. So that's in a few months' time. And what can we expect then? And what does that mean for oil and gas, and in particular gas? Because oil is a pretty mobile product, while gas is not so easy to ship around. It's possible, but there are more costs associated with that. So, to answer that question, what is the thinking about 2050 now? Because the EU, they already have goals for 2050. And the goal for 2050, and this is something that was established in around 2011. And the goal is that greenhouse gas emissions should be reduced with the order of 80 to 95% by 2050. And if you look at the graph then, the blue, the power sector, you basically see that the implication of this is that the power sector is to decarbonize by 2050. And then you look at the implications for other sectors. And then keep in mind the two bottom slices there. That's emissions from that is not related to CO2, and it's agriculture. And here we speak about emissions which is really hard to do anything about. So agriculture, this is the cows doing their things in the field, which leads to methane emissions. So if you really want to tackle that, it's about life cycle. I mean, you change your lifestyle. So this is what the EU had as ambition and targets, and this was before Paris. And I think the implication of Paris is definitely in the direction of being more ambitious. And then the EU, sometimes we think of EU as something simple, that it's one thing, but it's not. The EU is quite complex. You have the Commission, you have the member states, you have the European Parliament. They don't have one view. They have multiple views. That's why they make laws, because the laws, then you can figure out what they decided. But before they decide, they have very different views. And the European Parliament, they're already now calling for a 2050 strategy with a target of net zero emissions. And my guess is that, at least if you look at the energy sector, if the EU would like to be more ambitious, and you have emissions from sectors which are not related to energy, the implication for energy is that the target will be close to zero. To be clear, this is my guess. This is my guess. So my guess, when it comes to what the Commission will put on the table by the end of this year, is that they will define a target that, at least for energy, is close to net zero. And then the question. So if member states, the European Parliament and the Commission defines a target for 2050, which is near zero, what are the implications for the use of fossil fuels and for the industries producing fossil fuels? I think when you start to think of something close to zero, that's pretty mind-boggling. And I'll try to answer that. And I have no clue if this is the right answer, but this is my take. I guess you could also have one approach that I didn't dare to put on the slide. I don't believe in these targets. These guys are crazy. They need to get a reality check. It's not going to work. Basically base your business on policy failure. I represent a government myself. I mean, I cannot say that. and definitely not representing the Norwegian government. We like to be ambitious as well. Of course, you could argue that if you look, although the EU has a close to zero target, that globally you will need oil and gas for a long time, and that will also be very useful to drive the transition globally. And then you can say, okay, so if there isn't a market for my products in Europe anymore, then I export them. There will be a market for them globally for a much longer time perspective than 2050. But it's a bit of a different perspective to your business in Europe. Or you could take the approach and say, we can decarbonize our products. And what does that mean? Of course, in the field of gas, you have biogas, but perhaps more interesting for the oil and gas sector is to see if you could convert your natural gas to hydrogen with carbon capture and storage. If you could make that economic, you could potentially take away most of the CO2 associated with the gas. And my final point is, you could say 2050. That's I mean, who knows what's going to happen in 2050? And I guess, I mean, nobody knows. But I believe strongly that the policy direction from the EU is setting ambitious targets. And you guys know probably better than any that there are long lead times in the oil and gas industry. And the thing as well is that if you cannot answer that you're relevant in 2050, it will have implications for you much before. It's not like it's business usual until the day before you hit 2050. Already, I get exposed to a lot of this in the discussions in Brussels, putting forward the arguments on the way natural gas could actually help the energy transition. And then the answer back is often, but hey, okay, I hear what you're saying, but your arguments, they don't really, there are no solutions to get to zero. So gas is a bridge to nowhere. And the discussions with NGOs is really that the EU should not invest in an infrastructure using fuels that cannot be part of a zero future. So these things will come much before 2050. Okay, I think that's what I can do to provoke, and at least something to reflect a bit on. And then you can see for yourself by the end of the year what the Commission proposed and whether I was completely off track or not. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gaute. Very insightful discussion and very well framing the challenge we have ahead of us. Before we move to the next presentation and subtopic, so just a reminder to the room, you have the opportunity to ask questions through the application of the EAGE, so that hopefully you have loaded. There is a code for the conference. The code is 3098. And please feel free to ask the questions. And from now on, we will have, after each of the presentation, a small debate with the panel. But please feel free to ask some questions from the two first presenters. We can relay them. So we will now introduce Manfred. Manfred Brugman, who is SVP Exploration for DEA. Manfred is responsible for the whole group exploration and appraisal portfolio and activities. Before this, he has experience in exploration in many countries over the world, such as Nile Delta, Algeria, Germany, Gulf of Suez, and Morocco. And so please welcome Manfred for this first talk and panel discussion.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the introduction. Very good to be here, although it's a bit early, apparently for some at least. DEA may not be known to many of you. It's one of the very few German upstream companies, although you may not yet know this company. It has been around for almost 120 years already with different names and different owners. Currently, since 2015, we are a wholly owned company, independent company of Letter One, our sole shareholder. We have already heard about the downturn in the industry since 2014, and of course, that has also hit DEA to some extent. However, we have, I believe, emerged from this downturn with a much healthier portfolio, much more focused, and really took the opportunity to high-grade not just our geographic portfolio, but also our portfolio in the core, and not just with regards to exploration, but also with respect to our pre-FID and post-FID projects. So that has enabled us to safeguard our cash flow going forward, and we now can kind of harvest those fruits against the backdrop of improving business climate. You see the numbers here at the bottom of this page. We currently produce around 125 to 130,000 BOE per day, based on 2P reserves of around 700 million BOEs. We employ around 1,100 people, and our production is mainly focused on two regions, and that is Northwest Europe, Germany. This is where this company is headquartered in Hamburg. This is also where I'm based. Norway, obviously, and then a big chunk of production comes from Egypt and Algeria, mainly gas, but we also operate mature oil fields in the Gulf of Suez. So, our focus is really against the backdrop of our core capabilities on operational excellence, capital efficiency, and that has been reinforced really through the downturn. We do invest and keep on investing in our core projects in Norway. We have a sequence of post-FID projects going on, and also in Egypt, in the onshore Nile Delta, in our Desuk project. So these projects together will take our production level to around 230,000 BOEs per day in 2020-21. So that is really a proof of our resilience and a proof that our concept of focusing, again, not just geographically, but also in the type of portfolio through the downturn has paid back. With regards to exploration, we are focusing on near-field exploration in Norway and in Germany, also in Egypt to some extent. But also, once in a while, we do step-outs for high-impact shelf exploration. We will have a very important well coming up in Norway, in the Grasbett well in the Barents Sea, a very decisive moment in time, or a decisive year for the Barents Sea in general. We have quite good license portfolio in the Barents Sea, together with Lundin and other partners, and we're looking forward to operate our first high-impact well in that region. So this is really what we are. We do conventional exploration, again, with a focus on ILX and selected high-impact shelf targets. However, not just against the backdrop of the downturn since 2014, also we have weathered through the Arab Spring earlier this decade, and all that really led to a deep-rooted conclusion that focusing on these two regions alone may not be enough to sustain through the ever shorter cycles of this industry. So this is why last year or over the last 2 years, I should say, we took a very close look at Mexico, and through the last couple of bid rounds, we managed to put together a small portfolio here. It's now 5 licenses, including one operated onshore field. And this is really mainly because we think that we can leverage our engineering expertise that we have gained in mature fields in Egypt and in Germany, and breathe some new life in quite aging fields. And all that is complemented by offshore exploration, so this is really underexplored acreage in Mexico, and particularly offshore. And recently we got awarded some very interesting blocks together with our partners Pemex, Premier Oil, and Sapura, and Cepsa. So, what does it mean in context of a European portfolio? You see some numbers up here that I took from WoodMac, to give you an idea of what the scale here is. Europe is really characterized by, and we heard this before, mainly a maturing environment, mainly onshore ILX and selective high-impact conventional shelf exploration. That really leads to low well costs, but at the same time, we have increasingly limited running room, and it takes almost forensic G&G and high tech to unlock new plays in this maturing environment. So while many people think that ILX is associated with lower risk than in frontier exploration, for example, in reality, if you look at the numbers, the risks are maybe different in the composition, but overall, by and large, they are very similar. What we do like about Northwest Europe in particular is, of course, a stable business environment. We do enjoy the fiscal incentives. In Norway, obviously, that is helping exploration a lot. We can recover on that basis. We recover our expenditures almost instantly. The governments are able and willing to respond to macroeconomic changes, as we have seen in the UK. So this is, in terms of business climate, this is a place to be for us, being deeply rooted in Germany and in Europe. However, of course, as Anna mentioned that before, the running room is limited, and this is, again, the reason why we look across the Atlantic into Mexico, into other basins around the Atlantic margin. And the fact that 50% of the discovered resources over the last couple of years come from deep water alone is a testament of that change in the industry. And the basins where most discoveries have been made over the last couple of years, you see them here, are in Brazil, Mexico, Senegal, Egypt, and Guyana with Exxon. So it offers the opportunity to diversify portfolios, and this is again what we have done, what we will continue to do in Mexico. In terms of timing, lead times are of course much more attractive in Europe, much shorter, maybe except for the Barents Sea, which is still a frontier, one of the last frontier basins in Europe. But apart from that, it is of course very attractive. It leads to quick monetization, and even smaller fields, smaller tiebacks can have very attractive economics. Compared to the lack of infrastructure in many basins around the Atlantic margin, long lead times, much more effort involved in appraisal programs, so that can lead and cause sometimes even bigger finds to be very challenging in economic terms. The problem with the current downturn is that the number of real explorers has decreased. That is not too bad because you would think there's less competition, but these fewer explorers focus on an even lower number of projects and prospects. So as a matter of fact, the competition overall has gone up, and if you look at the signature boni that people are willing to pay these days in Brazil and also in Mexico already, that makes the outlook for project economics increasingly challenging. On the other hand, we of course have a much more diverse landscape across Europe, and that offers a lot of opportunity, a lot of running room, not just with regards to exploration, farm-ins and farm-outs, but very much also on the M&A side of things. This is not just to rate or compare, it's just to compare the global portfolio or the benefits and pros and cons of a global portfolio against what we see in Europe. This is, and everybody will draw its own conclusions from this. I think it's not right to say, well, it's better to explore around the Atlantic margin than it is to go after ILX in Norway. It is really what we want as a company, or it depends on the strategy of every individual company. It depends whether a company has the requirement of near-term reserves replenishment, then probably it would be more suitable to go after ILX and at the Norwegian shelf or in the UK. It depends on the risk appetite. It depends on very much on the core capabilities. Again, how can you leverage your core capabilities that you have developed across the European portfolio in other countries around the globe? So it really depends on these ingredients that are very specific to every individual company. Again, what are the risk profiles? What are the near-term and long-term portfolio requirements? And very much, what are the core capabilities? What is it that your respective company is known for? What are you good at? So we cannot be also as DEA, we cannot be everybody's darling. We cannot be everything to everybody. So we try to be very focused. We will sustain our exploration efforts across Europe, in Norway, in Germany. We will also be committed to North Africa, even though despite all the political risks that we have seen in the past. But we will also venture into new basins around the Atlantic margin, because we think that in order to weather through the ever shorter cycles of this industry, portfolios need to be diversified beyond Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manfred. I have a kind of follow-up question. I thought this was an extremely nice representation of how portfolio work occurs in the industry in a European context with ILX mature setting versus a global context. Could you expand a little on how you fit timing into this? And is it such that you assess the portfolio on a yearly basis, or is it a 2, 3, 4, 5 year rolling average basis? How often do you change your outlook on the portfolio in order to kind of manage what's happening today and what's happening in the future?
We try not to change our or fundamentally change our portfolio view every quarter or so. So we try, and that was the decisive moment in time, or the trigger point in time probably was when we changed ownership from a utility-owned E&P company to private equity. So that was quite a step for many reasons. So we took, and that was at the same moment the downturn started to kick in, and that was also then the moment with these two trigger points when we started to review our portfolio, to withdraw from certain geographies, focus on our core, think through what we are good at, what are actually our core capabilities. And once we reach that consolidation, once we had completed that, then start fresh and venture out and see where we can make a difference. So we try to be very consistent. So I don't foresee that our view on portfolio will change every year or so. This is very important because, again, the cyclic behavior of the industry is such that the cycles are becoming shorter and shorter, and we cannot, and if you want to move with the cycles, you would have to change strategies every year or so, and that, I guess, is not very fruitful in the long term. I think it's better to know what you're good at and then to try to follow through these cycles for long term.
Thank you. Maybe we have some questions from the room. An interesting one. So, coming back to the framing and previous presentation, there is a clear divergence of policy between the EU aspiration and entities like the oil and gas authorities. How do we rationalize that? And particularly for industry companies that needs to make long-term financial commitments. And the question is, what is the message you want to convey to the industry? So maybe, Gaute, you can give it a start and complete it by Nick.
Well, I think that was really the message I tried to convey, that at least in an EU perspective, that the focus on the energy transition it's real. It's happening now, and the ambition level, the way I observe it, is to increase. And I try to elaborate a little on at least my own thinking on behalf of the oil and gas industry in this respect. But I think currently different companies think very differently about these issues.
So from a regulator's perspective, I'd say who could not want a carbon or zero carbon future? Bring it on. We need to do what we can to support that. But at the same time, I think we need to be mindful that we need to supply the world with energy through the existing infrastructure. And so we have a duty to make sure we manage our resources and deliver those as they're required. I mean, if in a couple of years' time we're ready to move away from oil and gas, then fabulous, brilliant. But we're not in a position to do that. And so those of us who are in industry have to keep plugging away, and whatever political pressures there are, we have to do what's right, I think, for the people. But at the same time as well, I think industry has to ask itself what it can offer to the renewables industry. We have lots of great people who are fabulous at project execution, thinking big, coming up with new technologies, and we should be encouraging our people to use their skills in a much more flexible way. We should be training our geoscientists to think about how they can apply their skills. What can they do on the data front? What can they do with their knowledge of the natural environment? How can we bring that to bear on these problems? So I think most people are probably aligned in the general aim, but we need to make sure we do the right thing for today and tomorrow, and the immediate term as well.
You talked about the role of gas in that context of energy transition. What sometimes strikes me is what is really the outlook, or when I think about gas in Europe, it seems like, or sometimes it feels like, that gas is kind of wedged in between the short-term competition with coal-fired power plants and the long-term aspiration of renewable energy, and in particular storage cost falling to a level that it actually can compete with gas being perceived as a bridging fuel, as you mentioned. So, so is there really a long-term perspective for gas as a bridging fuel to whatever future? So, or is it just a short-term perception?
Well, I would say I make the same observation that gas is taking a hit from two sides. The climate policy and the drive to put a price on carbon hasn't really been working as expected. That's in favor of coal. And then you've had quite substantial support schemes for renewables. And then you have kind of gas in the middle that then perhaps is not given the conditions to play the role it could in terms of being a player in the transition. I think here you see different policies now in different countries. For instance, UK, an example, where you kind of more have an approach where you regulate out coal, and then you see that you get an instant response in the use of gas, also leading to these very significant emission reductions. So, but again, another point I tried to make is that it depends a bit what kind of time frame we're looking at in these policy goals. I think speaking about 2030, really gas has a lot to offer. Looking further ahead, I would really echo the point from Nick as well, for this industry to really think hard, what can this industry do to be an enabler? And I think what will probably sink in is the cost associated with this energy transition as well. And in many countries, you have a vast gas infrastructure. That's sitting there. And in my mind, it would be a huge mistake not to kind of utilize that infrastructure, because the cost is going to be high, and it cannot be extreme.
I couldn't agree more. The infrastructure element is often ignored, right? And the cost of building that infrastructure for renewables. What every time I travel to Norway and people tell me what they pay for their electricity bills, then it's kind of strange, because in Germany we pay exactly, I guess, I looked at my bill, it's 10 times what people pay in Norway. So that heavily subsidized strive for decarbonization and renewables, of course, comes at a cost. And long term, I think we really need, as an industry, to compete on cost.
Yeah, there may be to complement on, or to continue in this direction. There are many questions from the room, and one question is, what if affordable and abundant oil and gas, and especially natural gas, are more important for human poverty than high-cost renewables? So I think maybe we can continue the debate on the balance and the transition. How can we make the view of the panel maybe on how can we make the most and maybe transition, but still make the most of the natural gas? Maybe Gaute, you can give it a try.
No, I think that's a very fair point. I think, and you made the example, I mean, in many European countries, if you compare the cost of gas and cost of electricity for a kilowatt, for instance, the cost of gas is a quarter or something. I mean, it depends a bit. So, of course, when you have all these different targets that potentially also are conflicting, I guess the key issue is kind of striking the balance right and get the measures in the medium term to be right with what you want to achieve long term. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will shift to the next presentation. with Tristan.
Yes, I would like to introduce Tristan Asprey from ExxonMobil. He is the Vice President for Europe, Russia, Caspian, and Asia Pacific Middle East exploration. And Tristan will be talking to us about exploring again in Europe in a global context. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Isabel, and thanks to you both for policing such a large group. It's quite a task, I know. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start just with on the title slide here by focusing on the middle three words of that title, Global Exploration Portfolio, because everything we do, and frankly, everything industry does for exploratory work in Europe is set in a global context. We can invest exploration capital in many parts of the world. Everything we do in Europe and are doing in Europe, both as a company, I suspect as an industry, has to compete with other opportunities to explore elsewhere in the world. And by compete, I mean have the potential to yield discoveries, if our geology is correct, that would be attractive investment opportunities now. So that's the context within which we explore Europe, and of course we're not the only company with that thinking. So let me talk a little bit about what we are doing in Europe. For simplicity, I've just shown in yellow on this map ExxonMobil interest acreage and oil and gas fields. Your eyes are probably drawn to northwestern Europe, the North Sea basins, the southern Permian Basin, both onshore and offshore. We have a lot of historical production and exploration experience here going back many decades. It's where I started my career. It's where many of you have probably spent a lot of your careers as well. We do exploratory work here. Typically, it's near-field exploration, adding quick turnaround, quick tieback volumes, but not huge amounts in terms of new production. So what I wanted to focus on today is more the areas in Europe where we're trying to make some game changes, trying to go to some new areas, uncover new plays for larger scale resource potential. And I'm going to focus on 5 areas. I'm going to start here in Romania, in the offshore Black Sea. We got into this license, the Neptune Deep license, back in 2008, where the operator, our partner, is OMV Petrom. We drilled the Domino gas discovery in 2012, first deep water gas discovery ever anywhere in the Black Sea. Shot a very large 3D survey, came back with another rig for an 18-month follow-up campaign. We drilled 7 exploration appraisal wells back-to-back, finishing up in early 2016. And as a result of that campaign, we appraised the Domino discovery, made some additional discoveries, and have got to the point that I was emphasizing in my introduction slide. We think we have a project, a multi-TCF project. We're waiting for some government legislation they want to enact first, but once we have that enacted, we should be able to move forward here for a world-class large gas project, bringing attractive gas resources into Europe. Moving on, and to the other end of the continent, in the UK Rockall, as a result of some of the changes that the OGA has been making, very positive changes, we were encouraged to go back and take a look at a very frontier area. We picked up a license there with our partner Equinor. We operate this with Equinor as our partner. An undrilled set of blocks, 14 blocks or part blocks there. Some new geological ideas. We challenge our geologists, reimagine the geology. This is a very mature province. If we're going to come up with material new discoveries that are attractive on a global point of view, we're going to have to reimagine the geology. Geologists, I'm a geologist, I think I can say this, we tend to be a fairly creative bunch when we're given the room to be so, and so with some good reimagining of the geology there, we've come up with some novel play concepts. We have no idea if they're going to work or even if they're going to be there. We've got some very poor quality seismic, which we're addressing now with some seismic reprocessing work. Further to the south, in the Porcupine Basin offshore southwestern Ireland, we drilled a well back in 2013. It was called Dunquin. It did not encounter commercial discoveries of hydrocarbons, but it did give us sufficient encouragement and information to want to participate in the subsequent license round that the Irish government held. We did that, again, partnered with Equinor. We're 50-50. We operate some of those licenses. They operate some. And we were awarded 6, shown on the map there in yellow, in the southern and southwestern parts of the Porcupine, a largely undrilled area. We have been acquiring a lot of 2D and 3D seismic over 2016 and 17. We just converted all these license options to frontier exploration licenses and are in the prospect inventory building stage there. Very exciting. Back to southeastern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean, following ENI's breakthrough discovery of Zohr back in 2015, just across the political line into Egypt. I think we can take a Tethyan view here. We saw, of course, great promise in that part of the Mediterranean, a completely new play type, subsalt, which hadn't been explored for before. So following ENI's discovery, the Cyprus government held its third tender round. We bid on and were awarded with our partner Qatar Petroleum Block 10, which is shown there in the greenish color. We've been acquiring some 3D seismic there, and we're getting ready to drill a couple of wells starting later this year. After the Zohr discovery, a couple of offset wells have been drilled, one by Total in Block 11, one by ENI in Block 6. They both, according to the public reports, which is all we have encountered gas in carbonate reservoirs. That gives us some encouragement. Of course, it's no guarantee of success, and we'll find out what we have later this year. And finally, of the 5 areas I wanted to focus on today, 2 large blocks offshore southern Greece and Crete. In conjunction with Total, who are the operator, and Hellenic, we submitted a bid for this in a recent tender round. We were the only bidder, as it turned out, and we're currently working with the government there on the formal award process. That's why it's hashed on the map. It's not formally awarded yet. We hope that that will happen towards the end of this year, allowing us to start some seismic work next year. This is a completely undrilled area. It's very, very large. Geologically, again, some new ideas, some new concepts that the companies have shared, and are looking forward to get after with some 2D exploration, hopefully next year. 5 very different areas, very different basins, different partners, and different stages of exploration, but all of these with the potential to deliver globally competitive development projects. And as I mentioned earlier, the Romania Neptune Deep project is hopefully going to be moving into an investment decision later this year as the first of those. So that's a flavor of what we're doing exploration-wise in Europe. One of the sub-themes of the event today was to talk about exploration for gas in Europe, and we've already heard about the role gas can and is playing as part of powering Europe's economy, but also assisting in the energy transition. So what I'm showing here from our energy outlook is from 2000 to 2040, actual and projections for European gas supply and demand. It's actual data from 2000 to today, and then it's our projection out to 2040. And we published this. You can get all this online if you've not seen it before. The top of the orange color there represents total European gas demand. And you can see it's been quite spiky over the last 15 or so years, some ups and some downs. We see it, and it is actually growing at the moment. The last couple of years have seen increase in gas demand. We think that will continue out into the mid to late 2020s and then sort of level off, as you can see at the top of the orange there. I should say that while this is our projection, the International Energy Agency has a projection for 2040, which is about 8% higher than ours. Wood Mackenzie project to 2035, and they've got a projection that's about 2% lower than ours. So we think we're kind of in the range of what other people are thinking for European gas demand. The various colors show how that gas demand is met, and what grabs your attention probably is the red. That's domestic gas production in Europe, and it's falling very, very fast. We think by 2040 it'll be less than a third of what it was in the early 2000s. So you've got rapidly falling production, growing demand. That's obviously widening the import dependency that Europe has. It already imports more than half of its gas, mostly by pipelines from Russia, from North Africa, down from Norway. We think that'll continue to grow somewhat. But most of the growth in import dependency we think will be met with LNG. LNG from various parts of the world. There are numerous terminals built and being built across Europe to receive that LNG. For explorers, this means this is a great place to explore for gas. The infrastructure is there, the demand is there. If we can find gas, as we have in Romania, this should be a good place to bring it into market and commercialize those resources and help meet that energy demand. The growth that we project for gas demand in Europe is driven by power generation. So I thought I'd reflect on power generation in Europe. Same time frame, 2000 to 2040. This is our view moving forward from today as to how European power demand will be met. And the gas is where I'm going to start. You can see the relative growth in gas from the late 20-teens into the mid to late 2020s. That's what's driving overall gas demand growth in Europe. You can see the rapid reduction in coal, not so rapid a few years ago, starting to tail off now as countries like the UK phase out their coal fleet. And gas is filling a lot of that slack. Interestingly, nuclear, which is above the red, that's the dark blue color, nuclear power in Europe is actually falling with respect to its contribution, as a couple of countries have decided to reduce, or in one case eliminate, their nuclear power. The other color that grabs your attention, obviously, is the green. That's the rapidly growing wind and solar renewable power, which is helping a lot to meet Europe's power demands and will continue to grow to do so. The color at the top, incidentally, is blue. That's labeled other renewables. Just think that as hydropower, which is effectively built out. It's going to be very hard to squeeze in any more big hydro projects in Europe. But of course, Norway benefits enormously from that form of renewable energy. We feel, as we've been discussing the energy transition, that gas globally has a huge role to play, including here in Europe. It emits less than half the CO2 emissions versus coal in power generation, obviously none of the soot, and far less of the nitrous and sulfur oxides that come as problems with coal. So we think this is a significant fuel to power future economies. Nowhere in the world has that been demonstrated more than the United States. The United States, through abundant resources of natural gas, has gone through a system of large-scale switching in its power system from coal-fired power to gas-fired power. And as a result, over the last 15 years, its CO2 emissions from power gen have been falling by about 1.5% per year, even as the economy grows and the amount of power generation grows. Texas, where I'm based, is known as an oil and gas producing state. It also has tens of thousands of windmills. And this combination of gas-fired power with very rapidly growing renewable power is really driving a very effective transition away from the higher carbon coal fuels. More than 500 million tons of CO2 avoided through this transition. It's the largest reduction in CO2 emissions achieved by any country at any time by any method. I think it's a model that can be applied elsewhere. I'll just contrast this experience with the largest economy in Europe, in Germany, which has seen very, very rapid growth in renewables. Emissions and power gen are falling by about a third the rate they are in the US. And in fact, the unit emissions per unit of power generation in the US are similar, but the US is fractionally lower than it is in Germany. Germany uses a lot of coal. In some of the last 15 years, coal use is actually rising, and Germany is also retiring its zero-carbon nuclear fleet. Let me close with some comments on the main theme for the panel this morning, opportunities and challenges of exploring in Europe. It's where I started my exploration career back with the 14th UK round in 1992. The good news is that Europe is still delivering and can still deliver significant new discoveries, including what we call play-opening discoveries, game-changing discoveries. The photo there is the Ocean Endeavour rig in the Black Sea block, the Neptune D block, testing one of those discoveries, Pelican South, back in 2015. There's extensive infrastructure, has already been commented upon, to bring new discoveries rapidly to both the consumer and, of course, for commercialization. A well-developed market, strong local demand, and fiscal terms that are generally competitive, reflecting the maturity of the area and the import dependency of almost all European countries. And of course, there's us. There's an enormous pool of experience and expertise, not only being applied to the oil and gas industry in Europe, but of course around the world. Most of the world's majors are actually European-based companies. Of course, we have to reflect on some challenges, and we'll perhaps have some more discussion in the Q&A. There is growing environmental opposition to our industry in Europe. I don't have to tell you that, you experience it. France recently got a lot of attention by banning new exploration licensing, a country with very little exploration activity, but nevertheless, a very significant political decision to do that. I think more broadly, there's a variety of opinions within the public as to the role and the contribution that our industry is making and can make in the future. My own friends and family based here in Europe will ask me about, what is this energy transition? What is the role of your company? And I think that these individuals don't oppose our industry. They know that petrol is needed. They know that gas is needed. They drive cars, they heat their homes, and they cook their food with the fuels that we produce. But they're not quite sure how things are going to work out in the coming years and decades. And of course, back to the technical, This is a mature area. New ideas are required, and that brings us back to the opportunity space. A lot of creativity. I've seen some great new ideas in various sessions in these last few days, and that's what's going to be required in basins from Southeast and Northwest Europe to discover those new game-changer discoveries. Look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Nice to see your perspectives on Europe and your successes in the past and hopefully in the future. I have a question, and perhaps you can reflect on your company's thoughts on especially European things, European exploration, which tends in general to be a more mature province. We see prospect sizes decreasing, number of prospects perhaps increasing. And then if you put that in a kind of industry context following the downturn, talking about digitalization and technology, how are you going to handle increasing numbers of projects, prospects? Are you thinking about collaboration models? Are you thinking about increasing staffing levels? Or is it such that maybe the outlook for Europe is less and less interest?
I think overall we see, significant potential still here. Our staffing levels haven't come down. We still recruit here. We have a large office primarily in the UK doing exploration across this area and in fact some other areas of the world as well. What's driving that is the ability, I'll go back to the near field exploration, which I didn't talk about much, but that infrastructure is a significant asset for the industry and for the governments that are part interest holders in those assets. And that can leverage rapid tiebacks of infrastructure. Of course, there's a lot of work going on reducing costs of those assets to enable the threshold for new exploration to come down. And a lot of companies have been talking about the things they're doing in those established areas this week. We have a reasonably active program there, not perhaps as active as Equinor, but we're doing some of that. As far as the new exploration areas that I largely focused on go, again, I go back to my opening comment. Globally, if we didn't see the potential here for big new multi-billion-dollar investments, we simply wouldn't be here. But we're very strongly encouraged to work in this area, look for those opportunities. We think with Romania, we've shown an example of what Europe can deliver. And your own company with fields like Johan Sverdrup, clearly demonstrating significant remaining potential for large as well as small discoveries. Technology, of course, is important. I'll go back to the Zohr discovery that Eni made that's really kicked off this rejuvenation in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's just good new seismic technology imaging below a complex salt layer, which we simply didn't have 10, 15 years ago. So the access to those sorts of technologies and the application of those technologies, that's one example. We're intrigued by what higher quality seismic can show in places like the west of Shetlands, the Rockall, the Porcupine. And so we're here because we think we have the opportunities to stack up with our opportunities in Guyana and offshore Africa and Asia Pacific as well.
I have a question. What we observe, or what I observe, is that the majors are trending more and more towards gas. Is that because you believe in a gas strategy and that gas is competitive in the future? Or is it because the portfolio becomes more gassy of itself, so to say? Or is it a combination?
It's very much a combination. In its own right, gas is an attractive resource to explore for. With the globalization of the gas market, the ability to move gas around somewhat more easily than we used to be able to, it's an attractive fuel. But we also strongly agree that's an important part of a multi-solution part to providing more and more energy that the world needs with fewer and fewer emissions. Everybody shares that goal. And we think gas, as I tried to demonstrate in the US example, has a proven track record of making a strong contribution, and a contribution that can be expanded beyond the US. You only have to look to China, which has greatly increased its use of gas in power generation, partly for air quality reasons as well as emissions reasons, making a huge difference. People reporting blue skies in Beijing regularly versus the smog days of only a couple of years ago. So it has that very, very major potential to play as well, as part of a range of solutions.
We have a question from the audience, and I think this is relevant for everybody in the panel, so anyone who wants to answer them, please do. I'm excited about an answer. All future critical global energy parameters such as demand and emissions will most likely be driven by dynamics in Asia, India, China, for example. How can us in Europe still be relevant and impactful for global energy performance?
Can I start? I mentioned in my remarks, I mean, many of the world's biggest energy companies grew up in Europe and are staffed with many Europeans who've learnt their trade here in Europe and developed technologies here in Europe that can be applied and are being applied globally. A very strong contribution can be made there. I'm glad the question came. We've had a lot of discussion so far about the EU and the EU's targets. We have to remember, and I know we're in a European conference, it's only 4 or 5% of the world's population and a relatively very privileged part of the world's population. There are still about 2 billion people out there, 6 times the population of the EU, that are going out every day and cutting down trees for cooking fuel, which is incredibly bad for the environment, obviously, and not healthy either. So gas as one part of a solution to replace that as a cooking fuel for 2 billion people would be hugely impactful. So I think European companies, global companies, including my own, can take the lessons we've learned here and make a huge impact on countries like India and China, which the question is absolutely right. What happens in those countries is going to have a far more significant impact on global CO2 emission trajectories than what's done within the EU.
Yeah, maybe I can add a small perspective from Total's on that one as well. Of course, I think we all agree that energy demands are rising globally as we move out of poverty, and we do see a global market, both oil and as you mentioned, and very clear from your graphs as well, LNG is going to continue to play an even increasing role in the future. So it's highly relevant for us, certainly both around the North Sea area. On the oil side, we still see the requirement for local gas, and I think we can be competitive in Europe for consumption there, pending emission regulations. But certainly also as we look wider, and it is a global perspective, which I think we heard both from both operators here. The global market and the competitiveness is extremely important. So, for instance, Total has just opened a new Promise Yamal with Novatek in Russia, which is again going to supply through a new route LNG to the Asian market. So we need to think about EU and Europe in a global perspective always, both when we compete for the investments, for the local markets in the EU, but also as we talk about some of the technology challenges we'll talk about later on.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have reached a place which is the most natural time to take a break. We're going to take 10 minutes so we can survive 4 hours sat up here in the spotlight. So please, could we be back here and ready to start again at 10:10? Thank you.
So next part of the program, there will be a focus on the technology applied to exploration with multiple perspectives. We will have an example also with Millie on Edison of how exploration fits into the full value chain. And we will conclude on 2 presentations with a focus on digitalization in exploration. So it will be for those who were at the conference yesterday. There was already some panel session on digitalization, but we will dig into really a focus on exploration for that. Okay, so see you in 10 minutes. Thanks.
Okay, then I think we're ready to start again.
Okay, you do?
Yes. Okay, then we'll start again. Thank you for allowing us a short break up here in the spotlight. We appreciate that. We'll now kind of gonna change track a little bit in the focus, and I mean within a European and exploration setting, we're gonna kind of turn towards technology and the future. We have the pleasure of Nick once more. He started the last session, and he will continue by starting this session. So Nick Richardson from the OGA, please.
Thank you. So, welcome back. I'm going to be quite brief with an overview of technology as we see it as a regulator. We have a partner organisation in the UK called the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, which has recently been set up with a government fund of £185 million. The idea of that fund is to match against industry funding to really kick off new technologies in a number of different areas in the UK, but also work across border very collaboratively. So this is not purely going to be exploration focused overview. So some context there on the top left hand side. So UK context is we have an industrial strategy for the entire industrial base within the UK. Lots of countries throughout Europe have their own national initiatives. There are European Union initiatives as well. So the UK industrial strategy sets out some grand challenges for society. What do we need to do that's really, really important for the future? So there are 4 of these. The first one is AI and the data economy, and really putting the country at the front of the digital revolution in that sense, and applying it to lots of different areas. You can see lots of AI technologies on the exhibition floor. Clean growth, which we've been talking about this morning, obviously, so trying to maximize the advantages that we have shifting to clean growth. So how can we grow our industries, but do that in the cleanest possible way? There are some really interesting initiatives in the Netherlands as well, on trying to get synergies between the oil and gas industry and the wind industry in particular. So gas to wire solutions, trying to electrify platforms to reduce their gas consumption with inefficient offshore generators, that kind of thing. The future of mobility, as that's obviously going to have a massive impact on our industry. So as we start to transport ourselves and goods around the world, growth in battery technologies, how is that going to impact us? And then an aging society. So I think we're an aging industry in some senses. We obviously have demographic challenges, but also as a society, we have a very large aging population. How are we going to deal with that? And there's a certain amount of crossover between these. So this then feeds down in the UK into a number of sector themes. So there are 6 of these that we're working on. So one is well cost reduction. Second one is small pools, which really relates to reducing operating costs and capital costs for things like subsea tiebacks, autonomous production systems. Asset integrity, very important in the aging infrastructure that we have. Digital transformation, decommissioning challenge, and then subsurface and enhanced oil recovery. You can see on the right-hand side there's a triangle, OG21. So in Norway, there's also an initiative, and about halfway down that, there are technology needs. The vast majority of these relate to the themes that we have in the UK as well. So there's lots and lots of overlap, and we're seeing how we can work together with our Norwegian neighbours and other neighbours to try and identify the opportunities where we can work together. And then on the far right-hand side there, you can see from the Strategic Policy Forum, so this is a European Commission publication, number of disruptive technologies on there. Lots of these you can see again on the exhibition floor. The EU has a particular strength in robotics. UK has been part of that. Maybe we'll get some Brexit questions later, but I think whatever happens in terms of the UK's exit from the European Union, UK stated it would like to be part of those initiatives, and I think it's mutually beneficial. So lots and lots of different areas where we can work together. Lots of themes that need to be worked on in the most efficient way possible. So technology development and adoption. So as a regulator, our role is not in necessarily the growth of these new technologies, but how can we apply the technologies in the best way? How can we maximize their efficiency? There are a number of drivers for industry. One of the comments we get is, well, how come all these other industries have got such great technologies? And often the discussion comes back to, well, they're very, very low margin businesses often. They need to really use technology to maximum effect to deliver as much value as they can. In some senses, our industry has been a little bit lazy. We've been able to make money quite easily in lots of periods, and so there hasn't necessarily been an incentive to invest in technology to the extent that, let's say, the automotive industry has. Various changes in demand and resource requirements. We've discussed that in a global context as well this morning. And then obviously in the background we've got socio-political pressures, health, safety, environmental considerations, which we need to bring to bear to our problems in industry. So how can we do things in an environmentally responsible way, in a way that's going to keep our people safe as well. So there's a couple of graphs, the top in the middle there. The first one on the left is we've done a survey in the UK of R&D spend in different industries. And you can see there's a box highlighting extractive industries and what percentage of income is spent on R&D. And it's 1% approximately. So if you relate that to other industries, aerospace, they spend about 7% of their sales income on research and development. So we've got a long way to do in terms of putting money back into to research new technologies. And then the second graph there is showing for the UK continental shelf, what have operators been spending on technology. You can see that there's a dashed line in the middle, which is between 2016 and 17. There was a real low in R&D investment. We can see that that's going to increase over time, but in some areas it needs to increase massively to keep up with the challenges that we have. So a number of different areas with emerging technologies. Some of these relate to subsurface fields, so seismic and exploration, well drilling and completions technologies, but also we're very mindful of what needs to be done in a field development, production operations environment. So efficient storage facilities, how can we come up with new floating solutions? How can we make things more autonomous, make tiebacks cheaper? How can we try and exploit some of these stranded discoveries that we've got and really try and maximize the recovery from our particular basins? Lots of new technologies in terms of installations, topsides, treatment technologies. Some parts of the basin we have very specific problems. We have salting problems in the southern North Sea, for example. Facilities management, so again, going back to robotics, lots of uses for inspections, hard to access places, dangerous environments for people, but you can put a robot in there and do the inspection, not just in a much shorter space of time, but in a way that is non-hazardous. Well monitoring, HPHT sensors, fiber optics coming into play, some of that again on the exhibition floor. How can we enhance oil recovery through polymers, low salinity solutions? And then the bottom two there, well plugging and abandonment and facilities decommissioning. And this is really critical for us in the UKCS. I think we're going to have lots of learnings that will be passed on to other basins. How can we abandon our well stock in a manner that is safe long term, but is also cost efficient? So some really novel solutions in this field. Just recently we had a trial of the thermite plugging solution, which basically melts the seal around your reservoir so that it creates something that will not leak over the long term. And I think that's going to have an offshore trial fairly soon in Norway. And then long term as well for decommissioning, there's a need for monitoring. Once everything's come out, you still need to make sure that it's safe, and that's a challenge we've got for many, many decades to come. However, there are a number of barriers as well to adoption of technology. I think in some ways the industry, the oil and gas industry, has been somewhat conservative, certainly in the UK, maybe not so much in other parts of the world, but there's certainly a perception that certain solutions are risky. Do you want to be the first person to trial something that goes wrong offshore, maybe results in a leak? So everybody holds back. We have lots of followers, but not so many leaders perhaps. How can we help in terms of getting the supply chain up and running, in terms of contracting strategies, creating win-win situations, so that the oil and gas operating companies and those providing those solutions both have a long-term sustainable future? Can we bring new capital to bear on these problems? Can we reduce costs overall? Problem in terms of consistent standards as well. This is a problem that often gets pointed out to us by people from other industries who come and look at the oil and gas industry. It's, well, you know, how come you've managed to create so many different systems for storing subsurface data with so many different formats and you've never standardized it? In some areas there is some standardization, but that's a real problem when you're trying to extract maximum value out of legacy data sets that go back many decades. Sometimes there have been failed field trials. That's put people off when actually a little bit of an extra push would have put a particular technology to fruition. Is there a competence deficit that we need to address? We're certainly doing what we can as a regulator, for example, to do some really basic things. Perhaps we'll get onto machine learning and coding in a bit, but we're trying to push that from the bottom upwards as well. So not just leaders pushing down that we need to do this, but also provide some skills to those who are working with the data. So we're offering out free training in the UK to geoscientists to really try and kickstart this effort, so that the domain experts can talk to the data and the computing experts in the same language. And then we need lots of collaboration and lots of leadership in many areas, so that we can have successful initiatives, and particularly cross-border initiatives. We need to make sure that we don't have too many efforts that duplicate. How many vibrating marine sources are there out there being developed? Can we just all get together and develop one or two solutions instead of 7 that may never actually work? So that's something that's been going on for many decades, and we really need to get our arms around it and work it together. Okay, so thank you.
So thank you very much, Nick, for this perspective on how can technology meet our challenges for the future. So we will now propose that we welcome Martin Pedersen, who also has a presentation on technology from a major perspective, and so that we hold our questions to the panel after Martin's presentation, so that we can cover fully the topic. So Martin is a VP for Norway, Denmark, and Netherlands at Total. He's been working in many leadership roles in oil and gas in Qatar, UK, Denmark, and has been having an industry career for the last 20 years. So Martin, please, thank you. The floor is yours. For the attendants, please don't hesitate to send your questions through the EAGE app. And the code for the app is 3098, I think. I hope. Yes, it is. So please don't hesitate to send your question. We will convey them to the panel.
Thank you, Isabel. And first, I'm really privileged to be here, glad to be here. And I must say I'm in a very esteemed explorationist company today, so I'll defer all the specific subject matters to the experts around me. I have more an operational development background, so I'll try to put that perspective on my presentation here today. There's no doubt that Europe is a high-cost environment. We heard that in the earlier sessions as well. And we need to improve the economics of our prospects to be successful. But that's not only in the early parts. It's through the full life cycle of the prospects. And those are some of the areas that I'll try to address to make it attractive. Another part is how we work and how we go around it. And Total announced last year that we are core part of our exploration strategy is that we are setting up our global exploration part in 5 hubs, and we have just inaugurated one of the hubs here in Copenhagen, following the acquisition of Maersk Oil. And it's a good example of fostering the kind of agility that we need to be successful. And of course, from our part here, it's about the desire to make the next big discovery around the North Sea area, the next Sverdrup. But we also need to be realistic, and we also see typically that we are competing, and we also heard that today in the perspectives from the other operators. We are competing on a global scene, and we are often competing against larger volumes, less mature plays than what we find here in Europe, in the North Sea. So we do need to turn all levers and all dials to ensure that we can continue to remain competitive here in Europe. So my perspective is that we are, as a general industry, we're pretty good at finding hydrocarbons actually, and a lot of credit to all the brains in the room here for doing that. But we do challenge that we don't see enough discoveries that are actually being turned into projects, into real developments. So I would like to touch on how can we utilize technology today to ensure that we can make these discoveries into profitable and value-creating operations for us and our host countries. And some of it is around data management. Some of it I'll come back on what we do as part of the exploration maturation and how we use our data much better. But it's also throughout, as I mentioned, the full life cycle of E&P. So if we can lower our capital cost of developments, if we can lower the lifetime operating expenses for running the assets, if we can run it more safely, more efficiently to maximize recovery, those are all parts of the consideration up front when we decide on not to invest or do exploration in an area such as the North Sea. So we need to ensure that we are attractive. And there also the fiscal regime that we heard about, of course, plays a key role into that. So the opportunities are still significant in the North Sea, and Total is certainly fully committed to the North Sea. We either operate or part of a lot of the significant mega projects in execution, both in UK, in Denmark, and in Norway. And we do see at least 2 to 3 decades of production horizons coming from these future developments that are ongoing. And also part of the acquisition that was done very recently, completed in March with Maersk Oil. By that combination, Total is now the second largest producer in the North Sea area as an operator. And the volumes, a lot of that volumes also for the future growth is coming from these marquee projects such as Johan Sverdrup and Copenhagen in the UK, which will come on stream towards the end of this decade, next year actually. And that's a key part of the contribution for the global Total growth, which we expect will grow to around 3 million barrels per day in production. And I mentioned those projects, Johan Sverdrup and Copenhagen, because I do believe that they demonstrate the price that is still there to be had. We are told such numbers can't really be found anywhere, but we have seen and proven they can very recently, 2010 for Johan Sverdrup. And we also believe that there are still significant prices, of course, globally and in the North Sea. So Total spent more than $1 billion in 2017 on exploration, and expect to do so again as the same this year. We are committed to the North Sea. We believe in the potential there. And when we look at the opportunities and the strategy for the North Sea, there are basically sort of two parts of it. There's the exploration for the large projects with the significant materiality that can be new standalone greenfield developments. And there the challenge is really to how to revitalize or reinvent ourselves to think differently. Johan Sverdrup is a good example of doing that, so that we can come back with new ideas, come back with new concepts of how to address a very, very mature basin in many of the areas we operate. And a good example of this for Total is the upcoming well we're going to drill in Norwegian North Sea in Norway, Jasper well, which is exactly fitting into that strategy. The other part is the smaller discoveries, nearby exploration, and how we can use the exploration part or appraisal in some areas to really unlock and ensure that we have extended lifetime and value for the existing infrastructure and the existing facilities. And that's very much about the integrated work between the explorationists and the development teams in our portfolio and the assets. And the well we are actually drilling right now west of Shetland, Glendronach, is a very good example of this. So we believe the acquisition of Maersk Oil is certainly also with Total helping that we can bring the best of both companies now in the North Sea. Very strong technical skills in UK, in Norway, in Denmark, and Netherlands. And those areas certainly have had very, very challenging times, and we heard Nick talk about the 2014 crisis with the oil price, but also combined with again the North Sea having been a very high cost environment to operate in. So we have seen that's a key part of the puzzle, and how we can bring down the costs to ensure that these lower margin discovery certainly still can become viable. But the cocktail of falling oil prices, high cost environment is really a challenge. So we have shown we can bring down the cost. I think all operators have done that, and also the full supply chain coming from. So we believe we can compete with the cost. And there are some attractiveness also for Europe and the North Sea region about stability as well, because in a portfolio you have a very, very stable geopolitical environment around the North Sea, which is also attractive for the mix in the portfolio, especially in the uncertain times that we see globally around us. So that's a lot focus on the operators, but those are of course not the only actors, and as part of what we heard from OGA with the tripartite approach, that the fiscal terms, the allowances, the incentives are also extremely important in the basin around the North Sea and in Europe to ensure that we can remain competitive and attract the investments. And that needs to be this tripartite collaboration between the industry, the regulators, and the governments in the areas that we work in. If we look at the declining revenues that most countries have been struggling with, both UK and Denmark are actually good examples where we have our major projects. In UK we have the major gas discovery Copenhagen, and in Tyra we have a redevelopment of the Danish infrastructure. Those have both been enabled by government incentives to ensure that it was competitive for these developments to go ahead. In UK, it was the HPHT cluster allowance that allowed the sanctioning of Copenhagen, which is going to cover roughly 5% of the UK gas market. And it also incentivized further investment or exploration, appraisal in the vicinity area of the developments, again to ensure that we maximize the value of the infrastructure that's being put in place there. And closer to us in Denmark, we have just agreed last year a North Sea agreement with the Danish authorities, which is also enabling and stimulating further investments and significantly large investments. So that has ensured that we can now go out and redevelop the key gas infrastructure of the Danish part of the North Sea, which actually supplies roughly 90% of the gas supply from Denmark. So those are very, very tangible examples of, again, how the fiscal policy can also ensure that we can remain competitive all the way from the early stages of when we consider exploration. But a key part, of course, to unlock new volumes is new technology, and it is increasingly important. And we heard Nick talk about digitalization being the big new thing, and there was a panel here just with the theme of digitalization. So big data does open up new opportunities and helps to reduce cost through automation and robotics and predictive analytics, etc. And really trying to streamline the processes we use throughout the entire EMP life cycle. And the costs impact of that should be harnessed are quite significant. It's still fairly early days in a number of these technologies, so it's hard to put a specific number on it, but we do believe it will have a significant impact as we move forward. We know there's a huge price in the subsurface data and the subsurface domain of what we're dealing with. And that's actually been one of the drivers for Total to set up a partnership with Google Cloud, where they've jointly now, or we will jointly now, develop artificial intelligence solutions specifically tailored to subsurface data analysis, both for the exploration and production parts. And we do believe that if we can speed up the AI adoption in this field of geosciences, that will help us to build new systems, new tools that can make us even more efficient as an industry and as a company. And the objective is really to accelerate workflows. If we can become faster at screening, etc., we can make faster decisions, and there's a significant value related to that. But it's also as much in the reliability that we can actually ensure that we do use the vast amount of data that we have accessible through our acquisition programs, etc., and that they are actually being used and applied for decision making. So it's a really exciting part, and I would say AI is already used, for instance, in predictive maintenance of facilities in Total. So it's great that we start using this machine learning, deep learning, complex algorithms, etc. And I do believe there's a huge scope that is still unexploited in those areas. The use of machine learning is not new, and some of it goes all the way back to the 90s, I believe. And in Total, in 13 actually, we set up a room where we started to use smart algorithms like this more on the facilities side for maintenance, predictive analytics on rotating machinery, etc. And again, that can be part of also generating further savings, lowering the operational costs throughout the lifetime of our projects, which again helps to stimulate the early investment decisions for these areas. So today we are still exploring machine learning and deep learning applications, and there are many other areas we can use it in, such as forecasting, where we are applying it, how we can improve satellite imaging, rock sample and analytics, etc. on imaging. So there's a lot we can do that's going to lead to improvements by the new advances in technology that we are pursuing. So digital development plays a huge role in this. And I believe we have only really started exploring the potential we see in that. But there's more than just digital. There's also the physical part of our installations. Again, if we look at the full life cycle for costs on this, and there a concept we call facilities of the future is another really exciting part, which tries to really marry the digital advancements in technology with more, say, oil fields type technologies hands-on, and putting them together in a way that's going to help to generate real transformational change for our businesses. So what does that look like? It is, as you would know, some of it unmanned facilities for longer periods in time, no accommodation, no control rooms, control from shore, eliminate a lot of the areas already in the design stage for future new developments, again, which is going to make the area significantly more competitive. And robotization is one of the areas that can help doing that. And we are actually in an area with the Argos Challenge, it's called, where we're trying to make robots that can go around the platform and actually make interventions or anomaly detection. And one of these will be put in action on the Shetland gas plant in 2019 as an example. So there's a lot of opportunities. We believe facilities of the future, if we think out power from shore, once it's there, it can be utilized on other infrastructures that we do have potential to lower capital cost as much as 15% and operating costs significantly as well. And that will make a huge difference to our industry and the competitiveness of a high cost environment. So if we do this right, we believe that this can really help to develop both major fields, but also certainly the smaller satellite fields, the small discoveries, and translate them into developments and value creation for the infrastructure we already have in place.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. So we have a lot of questions from the audience that we will try to relay, so with very, very different aspects. So we will try to cover all. Few questions around the collaboration, the cross-border collaboration, of course the role of the regulator, but especially with a focus on what is done in terms of standardization of requirements, and is there an opportunity as we move into a higher technology and more AI that we accelerate the movement towards standardization cross-border? So maybe Nick, you can get a start, and then Martin.
I can start from a, I guess, a UK data perspective. I think that's maybe an interesting area. So we're in the process of setting up a new national data repository for the UK, taking all of the offshore data, primarily the subsurface data, and putting it into a cloud system. So that's the ultimate intent, is to put it into the cloud, possibly into several different systems, and then allowing people to use that data as it sits up there in that cloud. And I think by doing that, we can get every operator to contribute their data into that system, legacy data, new data. We can enable rights to that data, and ultimately there should be no need for anyone to have their own data store if they trust the data store and they can have control over the data that's in there. We will have it in the same format ultimately, but we also need to, I guess, to be a little bit cautious that we don't get locked into any particular workflow and system. We need to make sure that we can adapt those environments for the future as we build new capabilities. But certainly we are suffering, I would say, in the UK, perhaps in other regions, from having data sets that have sat within different companies, different formats, different interpretation systems. Trying to bring all those together and maximize the value from them is very hard. So we need to put a big effort into that now to get the value out over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
I can add a perspective, certainly from an operator perspective. Yes, geology knows no borders, and we need to collaborate clearly around, which is actually one of the drivers for the hub setup I described for the exploration part for Total, that to pull together the whole North Sea, if we think about Europe and the North Sea area, and co-locate that hub. We see the same on developments. A lot of the development support we do is also based on the regional hub now coming out of Copenhagen for the North Sea area, and similarly for the regional setup of how we manage our businesses. I do believe that a number of joint industry projects as well is a key to ensure that also we look beyond borders and really focus on the technical challenges where a lot of the companies are facing exactly the same areas. The conference over these part of days is a great example of that as well. And also, I do believe the regulators in the different areas play a central role of this. We've seen what has happened in UK with the OGA and the setup of OGA, and being much more proactive and assertive in some areas. Maybe I should be a bit careful here speaking as an operator, but I do believe to unlock the value and the drive, that helps. And also the collaboration between authorities around Europe and the North Sea region region, I think is an important part that we play sort of to the same standards and in the same manners, and not trying to adapt to different systems of complexity as we operate around the North Sea.
I fully support your view, and I think it's so important that we can share the data and that we also have a different approach to data access for the companies, because this could really enhance the value creation in both the UK and the Norwegian sector. And then we are talking about also big data, and then we have a much better basis also for doing all the analytics and AI and so on. So I think it will increase the competitiveness of the shelf, both in UK and Norway and Denmark. So I think it's a good way of thinking.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a great question here, and especially given the presentations we've seen of the push of technology, the interest, the drive that the panel are kind of indicating towards this. The question is, our experienced baby boomers are now going to be retiring, and few young talents have been hired into the industry in the previous downturn. So what are we doing about this potential knowledge drain, and how are we going to attract young talents to an industry which, on the face of it, is very future-looking, and not lose them to other engineering and technology industries which are perhaps didn't have the downturn and speak a slightly different language? So it's a very general question. We've got some hands. Tristan?
I can start answering. Because, yes, I think that this is an important factor, along with, let's say, cooperation technologies, more efficient workflow in the exploration. But then now I think that the companies are facing a problem of a talent gap, because the G&G teams, I want to say, is aging from a certain point of view. So you have a very experienced people, okay, that are almost close to the retirement. And then, you know, the younger generation that are not so much keen to join the E&P sector, on the oil gas sector. So how can we sell our story? How can we attract them? I think that this is a really an important point, because a lot of them are working or studying in the STEM discipline, then are really more attracting in doing something else, maybe in IT, in telecommunications, I don't know. But yes, that is a problem, and another point I would like to add because we discuss about cooperation, we discuss about technology. Technology is not only as a tool, but the technology also, let's say, as a different way of working and cooperating among the team. So where it's clear that is more and more important that among an exploration team, I'm talking about explorations, it's not anymore only a matter of a geologist or a geophysicist. So the team must be, let's say, broaden up, must include data geoscientists if you want to even become more efficient. So
I was going to add that the industry, unfortunately, does have, as an industry, a hire and fire reputation. We've been fortunate to recruit through those recent cycles and continue to do so. And I must say, we get excellent talent from multiple countries in Europe, and we look forward to hiring more of that in the coming years. I think the larger question is attracting the talent to want to come and work in this industry. I think it was The Economist, I read a letter about a year ago, there was an article that The Economist had written about the high-tech industry and other industries, and we were in the other industries. And I think when we bring people in, especially interns, summer students, and they see the sort of technologies that we actually deploy, the biggest data sets in the world, and we were big data 30 years ago, 3D seismic, way ahead of Google and Apple. The size of the computers, the power of the computers we use far exceed those of the high-tech industry. So showing people that this is a very high-tech engineer. And on the engineering side too, the engineering marvels, the solutions that we have to come up with around the world, particularly in harsh environments, the Arctic, Russia, deep offshore. It is a very, very high-tech industry, so people who are appealed to that, whether it's the digital side or the engineering side, there's plenty to do. And then you go into the future with all the research going on into new forms of energy or carbon capture sequestration we haven't talked about yet, but many of us have big research programs there. There's a lot of things there to get people who want a technological career excited. But then there's also the benefit to society aspect. Unfortunately, as you all know, a good 99% of the debate on our industry is on the emissions cost or the emissions emitted, not the benefits. And I think, as I was remarking to a few colleagues at dinner last night, we can tend to be a little bit apologetic about the fact that we produce oil and gas without emphasizing the significant benefits that come from those. And I personally see no distinction between wanting a cleaner environment for my children and ultimately their children and doing what we do. It's all part of the same solution. You can try and convince people with facts and data. Charts doesn't work very well, frankly. It's more about stories. So we try and tell stories about what our employees do and perhaps more importantly about the countries that our industry is deeply impacted in a positive way. But it's stories winning hearts and minds, not so much here are the facts.
And I believe also that we have to be out there telling stories almost in the kindergarten, at least in Norway. And then we have to follow them up and to tell about the opportunities we have in this industry. And you can work so much with technology and advanced technology. And so it's a kind of get them to really get eager on the technology side and see what this also can deliver of energy, and also tell them that the world will in fact need energy, and also fossil energy, until 2050 at least. And also about that I would believe. So it's a kind of being out there and meet the young people, and not at the university. I think that could be too late. Too late.
Yeah, I tend to agree that we have to be much less apologetic in the way we present the industry to the general public. So we and also this morning we tend to always discuss, how can we position ourselves against other sources of energy. So that is very much defensive. But instead, this industry over the last 100 years or more even has driven many societies. Has made many countries able to join the more developed part of the world. So I guess we have to emphasize that part of the corporate stories a lot more than we did in the past. So this is for me one important element. And the other element is that this industry is kind of inherently known to be a bit conservative in the way we work, in the way we, the offices are set up and all the rest. And the millennials these days, they expect something totally different. They think cross-functional and not in hierarchies. They don't think about work-life balance concepts. So some of them don't even know the expression. And we have to take this into account and offer them different workplaces, workplaces that they do find in other industries. And I think there's a lot of ground to be covered in this industry.
I think it's a very relevant point in the way how industry perceived, but it's also very important, the last statement, how we as an industry behave and how we welcome these new hires, especially when you hire the young talents. And I had just a recent example when we hired a team of about 12 people coming from the medicine industry, actually, which we found a lot of potential for this energy, for their work in exploration. And after a couple of days, I called a meeting with these guys just to see how we're gonna, set up first KPIs, what we're gonna do. And one of them came to my office saying, we have kind of rules with all our previous employees. We don't really have meetings. And I just, okay, so how you guys communicate? We just come and talk when we need. And is that okay? And I'm just asking myself, what should I do then? Should I explain that meetings is pretty much the way how we communicate? or should I rethink the way how we communicate? And it's just one example which really tells what might prevent those young talents join the industry, because we're quite conservative in the way how we behave, how we communicate, how we collaborate, all the way say all this world. In reality, if you come to the company, you will be pretty much in the process, which drives, right, the way how it's done. So it's a big challenge for us as well. Yeah.
I think one of the areas that the young people are looking for now is purpose. You know, for it's not just about money or whatever. It's purpose. Why should I do this? And what am I going to tell my friends and the others that it's cool what I do? So being able to articulate this part about the energy demand of the world, and that we can play our role in providing that responsibly. As what we do, and also about the climate change, how we and most of our companies are playing into that and taking the role, and you know, in terms of how we diversify the portfolio, in terms of how we look for carbon neutral production. CO2 storage is a good example with the Northern Light projects now that is running in Norway. So somehow being able to articulate that and then make it visible. It's pretty cool when you tell people, well, this, you know, is fine with this artificial intelligence for Google, but we'll put a team of 11 geoscientists to Silicon Valley to sit with the Google team to do this project. That's pretty cool for young people, etc. Or when you walk around the exhibition here, I actually have my son coming here at lunch because I want to show him some of the stuff in the exhibition. To talk about our industry, and you see this at the Total stand, which was new for me as well. This METIS system where you do on harsh areas, where you with drones and airships can drop darts down and do new seismic acquisition wirelessly, etc. That's pretty cool technology, and it's sort of showcased on the stand. So I think this thing about making it visible, that we can sort of talk about it and we can show and tell them that we're playing with huge and exciting toys here, and that should be attractive. But we need to show it, because it's not what's coming on the television. Certainly in Scandinavia, it's not the discussion in the media. That's all about green energy.
Thank you very much.
And I have one question to Total, because
quickly then.
It go back. Okay, it's more about you said that. Quickly, then I lost my mind. But yeah, it was something. Sorry, but we wait with it. I can take it later. Yeah, it was so important. But I come back.
I apologize, Gro.
Yeah.
Then I would like to introduce our next speaker. This is Millie Tornaghi. She is based at the Edison Spa headquarters in Milan and is the Vice President for Exploration and Services.
This one.
So please, Millie.
It will come automatically.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure to be invited here to such an interesting discussion, a lot of food of thoughts that we hear today and we can bring with us. So before diving into the topic of the today discussion, allow me just to give you a very short overview on Edison Group and who we are, what we do, and further then on our exploration strategy, before touching the difficult part, that is to underline the role, the challenges and the opportunities of exploration in a full value chain in Europe. Okay, Edison is a leading company in Italy and Europe. It is operating in supply, production, sale of electric power and gas, energy and environmental services, exploration and the production of hydrocarbons. So it's a full integrated company. Since 2012, Edison became part of the EDF group, so a global leader in the energy market. We, in terms of power, we have plants with a total capacity of 6.5 gigawatt of net installed power. We have infrastructure for the gas transportation, and we have an integrated presence in exploration and production with almost we can say 80 plus exploration and production licenses. We are producing annually almost 70 million barrels of oil equivalent, okay, in yearly, and we have 2P hydrocarbon reserve of 270 million barrels of oil. So coming back anyway to Edison and just recovering today's subject, so Edison is fully committed to build a low-carbon future. So that means change a new vision, a new mission in line with the changes taking place in the energy sector, and center around sustainability and customer. So that is energy, providing them innovative solution on energy efficiency. So Edison, as one of the oldest European company, is keen, wants to face this challenge. By the way, keeping its long historical leadership, industrial commercial leadership in Europe. We are also committed to, for sure, again, is in line with the new strategy to grow in the renewable sectors. And we have a target that to increase our wind farm and electricity produced by wind and solar farm in more than 40%. And by the way, keeping advantage also of hydroelectric plants and mini hydro. And so there is a huge exposure now towards the renewable. And this is something that changed a little bit the way or the vision. And where Edison anyway has always been, but it's more than 130 years that is in the power sector. But anyway, now with the changes in the vision, exploration and production, or the upstream is not anymore on the top of, we can say, priority. In the map, you can see our also operational presence. Again, we are present in, for sure, in Italy. We are present in Europe, North Europe, and in North Africa. We are Egypt and Algeria. But we can, let's say, discuss a little bit more on where we are running exploration. So this is a short overview, a very simple map that is underline where the countries where we are in, where we are running exploration and production. We are an international operator in the EMPLI with, let's say, 70 years plus of experience throughout the full value chain. I mean, up, mid, and downstream, as an operator and as a project partner in the various countries. Our focus is on safe, sustainable exploitation of oil and gas resources, paying a particular attention to the area where we are operator. We aim to, for sure, increase our daily production base, okay? We are currently producing, as I said, 50K BOE per day. We want to deliver in the next years the full potential of our 2P reserves, reaching 70 plus kilo BOE per day. So replace and increase the reserves also through a selective exploration campaign with a strong capital discipline. Now we have, we can say, pretty high focus in the Mediterranean area, and especially in Egypt, okay, in the East Mediterranean, that is the new emerging gas province where we have a huge exploration acreage. there that require a lot of effort also in terms of capex and risk. We want to also realize, just coming back, sorry, it's coming back to Egypt anyway, to the Mediterranean area. We can say that more than 60% of our production is coming from the Mediterranean and from Egypt. Then we have production coming from, for sure, for Italy, that is our mother country, and production from Croatia and from the UK. And in Norway we are present, and we recently sanctioned 2 development projects. So I hope that this will trigger even more organic growth in terms also of exploration. And recently, and I will discuss maybe a little bit later on, we enter also Greece, and Greece is an example of how exploration, especially for Edison, is supporting our already presence in the country with other different business. So it's a sort of complementary to other different business. It's taking the advantage of the presence of the group. So realized value by promoting also the development of fields near existing facility. We discuss a lot, and this will allow to minimize the time to market and with a strong capital discipline, and also to maximize the value of our, let's say, already in place asset. How to prolong the asset life in a sustainable way. Prioritize the sustainable growth also by reducing carbon footprint of all our operation and all our operating assets. It's another target. Gas reserve. As I said, our production is mainly, we can say, gassy rather than oily. And we are looking for, we can say, an exploration towards more gas reserve, aim at contributing to the supply of the EDS group and for the gas needs in Europe. So these are mainly our strategy. So if we move now into the topic, as I said, absolutely not an easy topic, especially if I'm considering a full value chain energy company like Edison, and if I'm considering, you know, the concept, the context, and what has happened also after the downturn of the oil price. So, low carbon future. We discuss a low carbon future, environmental sustainability, energy transition, increasing role of the renewables. So this seems to be the new paradigm. Okay. And new paradigms, that means a new, also new business model. So then the question is, which is the role of the exploration, and how hydrocarbon exploration could fit in this new context in Europe, in a highly mature country with let me say, an increasing opposition in respect to the fossil fuel sources, with a lot of environmental concern and difficult regulatory framework. Starting with the role, we can say that a simple and easy statement, the exploration target, and this is also our target in a full value chain company, anyway, is that you have to, this is the first KPI, you have to replace and add new resources that are constantly depleted through production. So resource replacements is anytime, the top priority right now, and along with capital discipline. But in an integrated company, we can say that the role of the MP, of the exploration, is then as a potential off-taker role also in any gas partnership, and a contribution to the diversification of gas sources and routes. So we can underline this as a principal role. Then challenges. Challenges, we can see that we have a lot of challenges. Looking at the context, we have the energy transition and the shift to renewables, we said. Okay, we have internal competitor. Now there is a sort also of internal competition in the company. There is a more we can say more high on how you will deploy and you will increase in renewable rather than in doing conventional exploration. Another point is that the EMP demands a very different kind of business approach compared to the power distribution and sale. So it's capital intensive, there is a risk aversion, and how again you can promote our business. And another challenge is maximize the upstream value. So through good portfolio quality, portfolio quality and fitness. So refocalization of your portfolio, a balanced portfolio are important factor. Considering that another challenge is coming from a tightening exploration budget and difficulties to deploy huge capital resources for the new E&P project. And again, difficulty in environmental authorization process. So I think that it's a really important factor to take into consideration. Opportunities, as I said, I mentioned new opportunities that can come from business opportunities as integrated part of the group geographical presence. I brought as example our entry in Greece, where we are fully integrated, considering the presence in the power and distribution of sector. The reason is our portfolio is already exposed towards the gas, and so we realize that natural gas is the good enabler for the integration in the energy mix transition. So it's a sort of getting advantage of our portfolio that is already exposed towards towards the gas. Then we discuss a lot about the need to become more efficient, because it's really, especially in the mature country, mature asset, we discuss about the role of the technologies. And as a part of EDF Group, I want to say we have a very important support from the R&D to test new technologies, aim to increase the exploration efficiency. And less, another opportunity is less exposure to market variation and less volatilities in the company performance. So you can balance, with if you are an integrated part of the full value or the full value chain. The last slide is because we discuss about Norway, we discuss about UK, we discuss about the cooperation cross-border, and I want also to mention something about one of the really mature country in Europe, and with a lot of difficulties also in running exploration. So, yeah, as you can see, this is Italy. There is a lot of almost 88 exploration permits, 203 exploitation concessions, so very huge, I want to say, distribution of licenses. Okay, we are producing now almost 6 billion standard cubic meter of gas and almost 4 million tap of oil, and this is the annual production of 2017, and is accounting for 70.5% of the domestic needs.
Millie, just...
Yes, I'm finished. Just to underline that there is a lot of potential yet to find that can contribute, to the country. But the challenge is how to sustain the gas production decline due to the difficulties to invest and in getting the environmental authorization process. So that was an example related to my country and to how difficult it is to work in a mature environment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. We have got quite a few questions come in while you've been speaking. I think a lot of them you've kind of addressed, but here's one specific one, and it's talking about profitability. Given the context we've heard about EU reduction, the emission reductions, the costs we see in renewables, what's Edison's outlook of future profitability in this industry?
As far as the renewables?
The O&G energy industry in general, I think, given the emissions and the renewables.
It's not, I want to say, really an easy answer anyway. I want to say that as far as EMP, so far, we are still contributing a lot, okay? Especially after the, we can say, the increase in the price of the commodity, recent increase of the price of the commodities. For sure, this we gain benefits. I want to say we are not getting the money, but I think that this is something that is really appreciated towards what was the expectation that we had before. So. Exploration or EMP sector is still, let's say, providing margin into for the company, and yes, the challenge is how we can compete with the renewables and which kind of margin we can have with the renewables. I don't know exactly. It's not an easy answer.
Okay, so we will move to our next speaker, and we will have two speakers now with focus on digitalization. So first, Gro Advet. I hope the pronunciation is Advet. Okay, so Gro is SVP Exploration for Aker BP since 2014. She was formerly the SVP Exploration for Norwegian Continental Shelf with Statoil. And so Gro will give some insights on the role of digitalization in exploration.
Thank you. First, I want to go through our strategy, but first of all, to say that we have a growth over production in Aker BP significantly during the 4 years, and we have done that basically by acquisitions of company, and we have used the downturn in a very constructive way to build the company further. And our ambition is to become creating the leading independent offshore E&P company. And of course, the exploration strategy is building upon that ambition. So we have secured a quite balanced portfolio within exploration, which has the agenda to contribute to the growth and also to value creation, of course, because that's very important. Also to mitigate the production decline, because we have some assets which are old. We have also requirement to deliver an internal rate of return larger than 10% on our exploration portfolio each year. That's quite a tough ambition or requirements, but we are on track on that. We have, of course, to build that portfolio, we have sought actively and accessed new licenses through the yearly licenses round and also the bi-yearly, but also have had some strategic BD moves to develop the portfolio. We are, of course, also focusing on building new hubs, which also the other companies here have been into, and we see, in fact, a potential now with the well we are drilling in the North Sea that could have a potential for building a new hub. And it just shows that it's still possibility to find larger opportunities in a very mature basin. And we are also working on, clustering different discoveries. We are cooperating with Lotus and Statoil on that. And this could, in fact, also be the new Aker BP hub, and that's also in the North Sea. And there is a place where we are thinking differently, also on how to, move fast if we make success. And that also, of course, will influence our profitability considerably. We have also a growth strategy in the Barents Sea, and the reason is, of course, because we see that there is a potential there, and also that the yet to find delivered by the NPD shows that quite significantly resources could be found there. We have just newly left the location on Svanfjell, which is to the east of the Loppa High, for those who are familiar with the Norwegian continental shelf. And it was quite interesting, the results from that well, because what we think is that we could have a hydrate here. So, and that's the first time, I believe, on the Norwegian continental shelf. So, but we need to do more analysis to find out what this is about. But it's an interesting well anyway to follow up and to find out more out what we really have in that well. Our ambition is to find 250 million barrels of oil equivalents in the period 2016 to 2020, and we are well on track on that. And I have also to admit that most of those discoveries have been done in the North Sea. Again, a very mature basin. But it shows also if we succeed on our company strategy, all these volumes will in fact be commercial. I think that's quite good. And this is net to Aker BP. We have invested significantly in 3D data during the last years. We have got that opportunity even in the downturn, during the downturn. And we are doing that because we think that given success especially around our producing assets, this really also contributes strongly, to move faster the barrels along the value chain, and also giving us more profitability. I think also that the state Norway is also earning on that, so it helps both the companies, the partners, but also Norway. We are building a strong organization, I'm proud to say, and we also try to have a profile, also matching, the challenges we have on the shelf, both when it comes to that it's really mature, some of it at least, but then also that we are into more digital transformation in the company. So I'm proud to see that we also are able, as a smaller company, although we have been much bigger than we were, to also attract the best talents in the industry. It's important to work with the data, and that has also something to do with digitalization to do. And so we have established a new competence center in-house, working on seismic processing and also imaging. Because what we experience is that really to have the best data, and then it's very much about imaging, can also give us more opportunities. And I can just mention the Frosk discovery which we made. We used the latest methods really to bring that up, and all the injectides in the Alvheim area, and it helped us significantly. So to invest in excellent data, work with the data, I think that's really crucial also to deliver on exploration. And then we, as I said, front-loading data, having the opportunity to invest in seismic data if we are successful. I think that's really crucial also to make profitable barrels. Digitalization is in fact only a vehicle to drive down cost, but it's not, it has a good or a huge effect, and also increase efficiency. So I think that's something that we also are focusing on. We are solely in Norway, as you know, but and we are positioned well from the Barents Sea in the north to the North Sea. Most of our licenses, or 2/3 of our licenses, are in the North Sea, where we also have 4 of our producing assets. We also have taken acreage along the Skarv, around the Skarv field, and also then more strategic toward the Nordland Ridge, and we see that there are opportunities for new play there. The Barents Sea, only exploration, and we have some exciting program there. We will also participate in 3 more wells this year in the Barents Sea. And of course we are looking forward to test a new play in the Barents Sea Southeast, which we have postponed until next year. Digitalization. I have to say that we exploration, that goes for all of us being there. We have been digital for very many years. I remember I started to work in the very early 80s, and we did also some digitalization at that time. And that was mainly to get the time compression, as I remember at least, to make in the maps, and of course to calculate the volumes. And digital twins, we have also have been used to, but has been, because that has been a necessity for us to model, and also to understand, an enhanced understanding of the subsurface. So we have been doing that for years, in fact. But we also have to be both cost-leading now in the future and still deliver world-class technical evaluation. And we are now in a process, I believe, to really transform our business model. And our company has also voiced clearly in Norway and to the industry and also all our stakeholders and the regulators that data sharing also is the only thing to really increase the value creation on the NCS. And not using the data and not being able to share all the data we have in Norway, I think that could also be value destruction, in fact. So staying competitive, both on cost and break-even, are in fact a prerequisite for us, for also exploiting the full potential on the shelf. So our opinion is that the detailed knowledge from all producing fields on the NCS, and it could also be across borders, both to Denmark and UK, could really create some new ideas to us. And also, really revitalize also the ILEX activities. And if we manage that, I think that we are really able also to create high-value barrels for the companies and the partners and our countries. So the existing applications that we use as an industry today and the architecture, we are working in a way in silos. And these applications and systems are not connected to each other. And the way we see this, it's important, and we have an ambition, to have a data layer which is linked to an application with the core system in a most flow-efficient way as possible. And this will give us also access to data. And I think it should be so easy to get access to data and also to big data. And that goes that we have to be willing to share all the data, or at least as most data as possible. And I think it should be so easy for us as when we are breathing the oxygen from the air, because I think it could really add value to our business. And in addition, it's of course important to driving automation and advanced analytics. That's key technology also, which has to be part of the digitalization. And looking into automation, it has clearly delivered also efficiency gains within different industries during many years, and also this industry. And I think we all know GIS application and have seen what we have got from that, and how much more efficient we have been, and also getting access to important information and data very early. So automation makes it possible for organization, in fact, to spend much more time on the key tasks. Analytics helps us again to deliver on the automation, but can also improve, I believe, our decisions, both technical but also at a strategic level, because they could give us a much better overview, the upside, the downside, and that we could see the scenarios better. So to be transparent and to get the whole picture, it could help us with. And algorithms, know-how, and data capacity are improving greatly. That is what we all experience, of course, but it will be important then to understand the technology and also the application for us. If not, we are doing it. If not, we are part of this. I believe that we strongly will not be world leading, which is our ambition, I believe, also for both the company and also Norwegian continental shelf. But we will be world lagging, so we will be behind. People are the most important. All these programs and technology are nothing worth without people. So we need to attract the curious people, which really want to find ways to use all the observation, to build knowledge, of course, within all these areas, and it takes time. And it's not easy either to understand how you can use some of these results yet, because we have tried to use some of these tools before without really succeeding with it. But of course, so I think that the key thing here is really to have enough data. And if we are talking about big data, that the industry this is big data in Norway, then Google, they are just laughing at us. This is not big data. So I think that Norway, the Norwegian continental shelf, is too small in a way to, even if you have gathered so much data, it's too small in a big data concept. That's why we also are so dependent on each other, and also across the borders, I believe. So also to motivate our people, encourage them for deeper interest and insights, that's really key to success as we see it. So deliver a robust energy business may depend also on better cross-company and maybe even cross-border cooperation, as I already has mentioned. And it is a necessity, I believe, for producing also affordable energy in the future. So we have to be competitive to the other energy that we are competing with. But if we manage, then I think we have a long-term, could have a long-term strategy for also our business. Successful exploration on the ends also on the Norwegian continental shelf require also utilization of current infrastructure and also a bit different way of thinking, because we are making smaller discoveries. So we have to do more of the clustering. And I believe that we could take out much more volumes or barrels from the shelf, taking this strategy even further. It's important to be able to lift discoveries. They are getting smaller. We can see it also on our creaming curves, and we can see that globally on the creaming curves. So it's more the expectation and how do we relate to this. And we have to be globally competitive also when it comes to create value from the project and we initiate. So it might be that we have to be even more radical changes are needed. It could be that we have to be or meet even lower break even. We have said that we should be around $35 per barrel, and might be that this is not enough. So we have to also have focus on that and also do things in a shorter time. And digitalization is so important in order to meet on these requirements. So I think that they are enabler, not the solution, but they are enabler for us also to be competitive in the future as an industry. But the main thing also here is that we are able to control all of our data. Yeah? Sorry.
Can you check the time?
Yeah. Work processes and application, and they are also key to deliver a more robust energy business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're generating a lot of questions, which is great to see from the audience. One of them, which kind of it continues on some of your conclusions, Gro. It highlights some of the words you've used in your presentation, but I think it's relevant for everyone in the panel, and that is that collaboration, sharing of data between companies has been mentioned a lot, and it's a lever to solve some of our future challenges. So what is the perception on the panel of how that is working within exploration in Europe today?
I guess as an industry overall, we've been quite closed, let's say, industry historically, and that's definitely plays a role in the way how information is shared. And I think we still need to change the way of thinking where the value comes from, because in reality, when they think about exploration in the past, getting the data and being the first to access the data was pretty much the key success factor, right? Now it looks like learning from extracting information from the data become the new level of competitive advantage. And that challenge, it's definitely not for just one or another company. That's a challenge for the industry, how we transform using the data in the way that data should become available for everyone. And where we need to compete is how we really use that data to extract information faster, to use that information to make decisions faster. But the baseline, the data, should be, I think, open as much as we can. That's my perspective.
Exactly, because the same way we still think about current and future workplaces, we have to think about business models around data. So you spoke about breaking silos. This is exactly what is needed. So we need to rethink ownership of data. And every company owns its own set of data. So I think that old concept, I acquire data, I pay for it, so it's mine, this will not survive. So we need new business models around that, and that indeed needs also the help of the regulators. But it's an industry-owned process, I guess. If it doesn't come from the industry, it will just not happen. So ownership and new business models, I think there needs to be some disruptive changes need to occur to make full use of the inherent value.
One of those disruptive changes may have to apply to a part of the industry which isn't represented here, which is the geophysical acquisition side of the business, who prize the data that licensed to us. And we own some of our data, but much of it we license. And of course, it's not really in their business model for us to share that data, and we find it very hard to do so. Even a couple of lines in a data room takes enormous effort. Getting our seismic vendors to give us permission to share the data that we don't really own. So again, whether that's a regulatory step to come in and help facilitate that or not, but there are some real commercial challenges for that part of our industry to promote the sort of sharing that we're talking about.
Yeah, I understand that, but I also think that maybe it's the time to think differently around some business models. So just to be able to take out the potential that could be not only in Norway, but it's other places also, of course. So it's more to think differently, and we haven't discussed that with any. What should I say, geophysical companies. So we should have done that before presenting this. But I think we have talked about it earlier also in Norway. But there are something about the cost and the access to data, and of course it should be profitable for all parties, but I think that we have to look into and be open to look into all kind of business models then. So that's my message.
If I can add, so I think there are also very different approaches as we see from the regulators as well around. If we look at our area in Europe on the North Sea between Norway, even for licensing rounds, in terms of where actually government etc. will ensure that data is available for new opportunities, which is not the case elsewhere. And we have also seen in some areas with well data, for instance, where the regulations dictate that data has to be made available after a certain point of time, and then that drives, of course, opportunities for others. So I think it is finding that balance between where there's, again, coming back to the collaboration and a similar approach around our different countries, that is what's required to drive some of those changes there. And then we will always have, of course, given that we can also be competitors, that's more how we utilize the data. But there's a lot of knowledge in intellectual properties and methods of how to do that. But there we also need to be aware of the competition, of course.
I'll just say briefly from a regulatory point of view, for us it's not just about the platform that you put the data on, it is about the regulations that underlie it, and we've been going through a process of laying new legislation that does reduce the time periods that it takes for data to get into the hands of industry, broadens those data sets. Also, it's been quite interesting for us trying to get operator groups together to work on projects. Often you'll find that to an extent they share data, they don't want to share ideas, but you talk to them individually and they often have the same idea. And if only they would get over the barrier and say, well, let's share those ideas and then let's work on delivering those projects. I think you could create much more value for everybody. So, don't just think that you're the only one with that great idea about that new play. There's probably someone else, and if you came together, then you could both exploit it.
Could I ask, because I hear you saying that you would like to share data, and I've heard your boss say the same, and he says something like, the more you share the data, the better it gets. So in your company, are you sharing all the data that you can, or and what are the main obstacles, barriers to sharing data?
No, we are sharing data. If you think internally, of course, we are sharing all data. But we are sharing data with our partners. But it's, of course, the model is that if you have gathered and paid for the data through the wells and so on, you are not sharing it with other licenses without doing trade or whatever. So it's more to have access to all the data. And I'm not thinking so much about the exploration phase either, but it's more when you get more mature shelves. And you know, some people within exploration are really good at using data from the producing assets. And we do not have a tradition for doing it, so we are more thinking silos internally too. But then this play that we are going to test in the North Sea now, the coming autumn, is based upon that we are using really data from the producing assets really to come up with new ideas then, new plays then. And I think that's so important that in all the fields, producing fields, there are so many data which are not being used at all. And I can talk for our company. And that I feel is really, it's value destruction, in fact, because we have used so much money to gather all this data. And now, you know, when we get all the sensors out on over platforms, even on our rigs, you know, we can easily read all kind of responses much faster too. So, and we could then also involve it in our evaluation much faster than what we could do before. So everything is becoming so much easier or available then to us. So I'm not saying that, because exploration is exploration, but really to understand what could be around the producing asset, then I see the need, and I've seen that it works to use data actively from the producing assets.
Thank you very much. Then I would like to take us to the final session this morning. We have the pleasure of introducing Alexei Vaskevich. He is the Exploration Director for Gazprom Neft. His responsibilities are blue and greenfield exploration. He has the exploration portfolio management as well as the research and development program. And he'll be talking to us about the digital transformation in exploration. So, Alexei.
Yes, thank you. So, thanks for still being with us. It's been a long session, but I'll try make it a little bit more interactive. You know, when I choose this topic and when we had a discussion, I was kind of thinking what should be the real discussion about, and I decided to shift a little bit away from the company I'm representing on, but talk more about the learnings we have in our digital agenda. 3 questions I'll try to answer during my presentation. Why digital? Why digital in exploration? And what we believe should be the vision, or what would be the, let's say, structure for approaching that digital and exploration. But just to give you a little bit of context, Gazprom Neft is the 3rd biggest producer in Russia with about 1.7 million BOE per day. And we have quite diversified portfolio, mostly around Russia, but also in the Middle East and Balkans and some other parts, including North Africa. Okay, starting with the question of why digital. You know, we are in the decade, or maybe just in a few years of the upcoming decade, of what I call digital hype. Everybody talk about digital, every discussion, every presentation, we all talk that about companies like Google, Alibaba, etc., saying that's the new way of doing business, and that's what we need to take as a recipe, apply, and success will definitely come. So there is quite important distinguish between all those examples you usually hear, all those companies who made this disruptive way through and showed significant performance growth, is that those industries are represented, if you're gonna look at that, what we call digital vortex, all those industries are one way or another located in the center of it. Another way, these industries cannot really survive without becoming digital. You cannot really think of good, bank right now without online application, pretty much instant money transfer and stuff like this, and high level of security, right? For us, it's very important to understand it's still an opportunity strategy. It's not a survival strategy. For us, we can still see ourselves in the next decade, and if you're going to ask financial department or strategy department for every company, they will tell you that our strategy to show this performance in the next 20 years, and digital is not part of their agenda. They have some assumptions in it, but we can survive without it. It's nice to have, let's say it this way. So it's very important to understand that from that perspective, the way how we approach digital, the way how we structure our organization, the way how we motivate our people for digital should be a little bit different from the industries we usually hear. But at the same time, I'm not going to repeat that we are, especially in Europe part, facing a lot of challenges, including in oil and gas industry. And I can just tell you one example. Last year, biggest onshore discovery in Russia was 210 million barrels, by the way, made by Gazprom Neft. 15 years ago, we made, in average, 3 discoveries a year, about a billion barrels. So we're talking about decrease, not just, it decreased by fault, which means that the challenge is there, and we need to provide the resource base for the growing production, or at least steady production. And we're doing a lot of things. We now using horizontal drilling as a base. We're now doing fracs, not as much as we can, but what is the optimum. So the push for the technical limit is there, but the question is what efficiency increase can we get from that technical limit? So when we talk about technology, this technology is unfortunately restricted by what we call that miracle triangle, where you have cost, quality, and time, and you always can choose only 2, right? If you want it quickly and good quality, it means that it's not going to be cheap. If you want it cheap and quickly, then you probably sacrifice with the quality. But there are many industries, if you think about, who already learn how to influence all 3. Look at our gadgets, right? It's getting cheaper and cheaper, it's more and more reliable, and every development and production cycle is getting shorter. So they somehow learn how to do it. And there are many examples from different industries. And that's where I think digital becoming the player. That's where I think the main enabler for that performance increase become from the digital source. But the important part is to really understand that in that approach, digital is not something on the side. It's not really complementing the hardware. It's pretty much becoming the core, which means that it's a totally different way how you build your process. Now let's talk a little bit about exploration. We met with many companies, including companies who've done digital for other industries, consultants or software developing companies. And if you're going to look application for the digital across the value chain, you will find that there are much higher impact, let's say, or efficiency improvement coming from the later stage of the field development by their vision. All this advanced analytics, all these digital twins usually apply to the development and production phases, saying that's really where you can make huge impact. At the same time, we all understand that if you think about exploration, that's where the biggest uncertainties, that's where the biggest biggest unstructured data, that's the biggest real source data coming from, and that's where pretty much the biggest value is built, right? The most 80% of the value built by the end of the exploration phase. So intuitively, we all understand something wrong here, right? Something is not really matching in terms of the potential for the digital and exploration. And I think what our learning showed us is we're kind of starting guessing why it's so. if you think about exploration in terms of the process flow, you will see few attributes to that. It's a quite lengthy process. We're still doing stuff starting from seismic till the geological model is complete, 12 to 18 months in general, in average, right? We're trying to improve that. We're talking about 2-3 months reduction, but we're still talking about quite substantial time. We're talking about a lot of, let's say, routine manual stuff still in there, although it's digitized, a lot of software application, but it's mostly done by human and usually transfer from one stage to another. So, and finally, all process flow built based on that perspective. A lot of data at the beginning, we need to simplify the data. By the end of the cycle of exploration, we probably have about 10% of the data which we hand over to the next phase, right? To the development, drilling, reservoir engineering, whatever. So it means that our main task was historically to get as much data at the beginning and then simplify it in the way that hopefully we keep the most of information available. On the bottom, I showed a good representation, the way how the process works. You come to the tree, or you come to the forest, you choose the biggest tree, because if you ask any geologist how much data you need, the answer will be I need more, right? The more data, the better. That's the perception of our industry. So you find the biggest tree, and then hopefully you get most of it used, but even if at the end you need just a bench or a piece of fence, you still will do the biggest tree, just because that's how we work. And I think that's really the key. If you think where the digital potential is really to start thinking in the opposite way, right? If you know exactly what you need at the end, if we know exactly that drilling need not the full geological model, but they really need some parameters at each X, Y, Z, right? Can we get those parameters from the source data? Can we get a new way of interpreting seismic data when you can pretty much online extract that information from and just avoid that middleman of geology modeling in a good sense? So, and then you start asking, okay, if that's the case, if that's where the potential is, who will be the one who will start challenging the industry? Is that the service companies? I don't think so. Is that the software developing companies who are selling improvement to 3, 4, 5% as an achievement? I don't think so. And is it exploration teams within the companies? Is it regulatory? So that's probably where it's all starting turning around. Okay, potential is there, and it's huge. Tools are there, and we're going to talk about tools in a second. But the question probably we have right now, who will be the main driver for those changes? And I think that's where collaboration starting playing the key role for that. Now, if we know that the potential is there, and we know that there are many tools already available for the industry, not only from the oil and gas, but as I mentioned before, medicine, for example, right? Watson, doing this scanning for MRT and reading, just replace MRT with seismic, and you will probably have the same sonic diagram and the same algorithm behind that, which can help significantly increase speed of information extraction. And that's where we're getting to the point, okay, with all these opportunities, how really should approach that? And that's where I think the role of the exploration teams within the organization become the key, really to identify these areas where the biggest value for the extracted information come from. For example, we've been talking for investment in the computing power, right? So many companies doing that, showing how much they added clusters and how much computing power increased. So they're making models more dense and getting more and more calculation running. But it's one way, and that might be the stake they're taking, saying that's what we believe where value comes from. Another approach might be saying, we're not going to do that. We will just invest in the new researches and trying to find the way how to avoid that computing and extract data from the source data. And that's pretty much another approach for same challenge. And I think each company need to really, based on their value drivers, identify which product for the digital transformation they need to use. And that's, which puts me in the final slides, that's what Gazprom Neft went through when we started this process. We had about 200 ideas, what we called, in the digital area. And then we start prioritizing those ideas, trying to build what will bring the biggest value. And then we just realized there is no way we can do that. It's just so difficult. There is so much uncertainty. We don't really have experience in doing that. So we pretty much revised the process, starting with top level, where we think what are the main value drivers in the digital arena for exploration. Then based on that, based on identifying which we believe is the biggest value drivers, we start building the products. Okay, which product do I need to create to capture that additional value? And that product, it's a middle part of it. And cognitive geologist is one of them, digital lab is another part of it. And all that based on hundreds and hundreds of digital tools and solutions, which are mostly already exist in the industry. So important message here that this bottom level is probably, as an oil company, we shouldn't be really focusing on. There are many companies really investing in developing these basic digital solution tools, which we think might be really misunderstanding the whole point where the value comes from. And if you really understand why you're doing digital, what value you're trying to capture, tools are there, believe me. If you really kind of start looking around, if you create good ecosystem with through partnerships and through just playing in that arena, you will find that other industries, they already went through so many things we don't know yet, and there are so many applications for that solutions. With all that, I think that digital is not only a new enabler for the industry, it's a new way how industry will be operating in the future in terms of the organizational design. In terms of the physical landscape, we cannot attract talents and put them in the desk and saying you will work from 9 till 6 and lunch from 12 to 1. It's not going to work. We need to create totally different environment. They want to live in the office. The whole concept of living office, that's must have, right? And it means that we have to adjust to these new realities. But I think most important thing, when you start putting digital as a real core for your value, you will find there is a new way of considering those challenges. And I want to show you one example, a very simple diagram of showing the uncertainties we're trying to reduce at exploration, and it's very relevant for the Gazprom Neft because we just acquired more than 15 new license blocks onshore, blue fields, where big exploration program will start in the recent years. So our usual approach would be you start from some regional survey and then you go to the 2D seismic, right? It's the industry proving first step on the ground, 2D seismic, and then you kind of moving along with either 3D or first well. But what we've done is we kind of start looking what really uncertainty we need to achieve at each point of time. And we realized that 2D in the last couple of decades, due to technology evolution, to the technical evolution, developed so much that we already, with 2D, getting uncertainty reduction pretty much as we did with 3D 20 years ago. So it's all good in terms of making decisions, right? But in reality, we overpaying for that extra uncertainty reduction at that particular phase. And we challenge ourselves, okay, is there any other method which will be just good enough for this level of uncertainty reduction exactly at this point? And we found none. There is no industry-proven method which will be applicable and considered by the regulator and can be used as a license obligation. So what we've done, we create a consortium with the institutes, with the companies who was doing different non-seismic surveys, like electromagnetic, radiomagnetic, geochemistry. And we found that each of these method has some level of uncertainty, not enough to be industry proven, but still some. And so what we're doing now, we challenge the industry, can we actually create a new platform of integrating those methods on the digital platform and access the level of uncertainty reduction which will be, sustainable for the industry. So it's just one of the examples when just starting from the tree and starting from the fence, what exact level of uncertainty you want to achieve, and what combination of which tools, which already all exist. They're all there. All the physics behind that was written in 1960s, right, on each of the method. But again, just a new level of digital platform can enable totally new method for the industry, which we think might be quite cool. So with that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexei. That was incredibly interesting. I have a question. On your final slide before the appendix, you mentioned 30% increase. And you touch on efficiency, cost, and the quality of decision material. I think efficiency and cost are kind of very tangible in the digital discussion. I mean, you gave us an example already in the appendix there, where you're actually trying to influence the quality of the decisions. But is it analog based, access to more analogs, access to more data, or do you actually really see a shift? I mean, you mentioned 2D to 3D. Is it going to be 3D to digital?
That's probably the hardest KPI to justify right now. Cost and speed is definitely something we can measure. Quality of decision, again, that's just start thinking about exploration as an uncertainties, right? We all working with dynamic uncertainties, and it's not only at what level of uncertainties we're able to make a decision, it's using the industry knowledge, and that's where collaboration becomes the key. That's where using the global knowledge about the analogs might really improve your decision making by using all that data and utilizing all that data in your decision making. So with less data, faster decision, but still much higher quality. That's I think, the new triangle we're trying to create for ourselves, and that's how we see impacting each part of that triangle.
Can I make a comment? Just a very interesting presentation, and I couldn't help thinking again on the full value chain of what we're doing here, because what you're showing, it's so hard to say no to what we don't need. It's easy to add on, and it's exactly the same challenge we see on platforms, on facilities, where we talked for years about standardization, but we still have bespoke solutions because we can do it. And it's the same we see on software tools that we all develop, because though there's a lot out there, it would be nice if it could just do this or just do this. So we have this habit as humans to invent bespoke solutions, and it's very hard to say no and say, actually, that's not required when it's available.
Yeah.
It's an interesting...
Or you accept the remaining uncertainty, right? So the last 5% would cost you 50% of the original investment.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think, from our perspective, we see lots of what's going on in industry, and one of the big problems we've got is reducing cycle time in order to mature resources. So from exploration all the way through to production, how can you do it as fast as possible, particularly where you've got aging infrastructure? And one of the things we've done is look at other industries and the types of problem statement that they come up with. If you look into the aerospace industry, for example, they'll say, well, I need my aircraft engine to operate maintenance-free for 50,000 hours, something like that. We've, as an industry, maybe not come up with such clear problem statements sometimes. But one that we've come up with is, for example, to do with seismic processing. You look at a license, how long it takes to process your seismic, 12 to 18 months. Why can we not have a really good quality workflow that exists today and compress that down into a few months? But then you've got the problem of, well, you're always having geophysicists then saying, well, actually, I can invent an even more complicated workflow, and you keep pushing that time out. So you need to make sure that there's a balance between shortening that cycle time, looking at the impact on the economics versus the extra quality of the product that might come out at the end, and always challenge the scientists and the technical guys to not have all the bells and whistles necessarily, but to drive those resources through the funnel.
I think one of the way actually how to tackle that is start integrating technological and digital KPIs in the base business case for the projects. Another way, right now, as I mentioned, we all justifying business cases based on what we have now, right? In terms of the technology, in terms of the progress we've made, and putting some learning curve in the future. But again, that's always covered with some safety factors, right? So we quite conservative in the way how we tackle that challenges. We, as an example, with one of our projects, we made an investment decision a few months ago, first in the company history, when we couldn't justify the minimum profitability index. Let's say 1.2 is the minimum you need to reach, right, to get an investment approval. We were only able to justify about 1. So the rest 20% we took as a challenge, saying we don't know exactly how we will get there, but there are a list of opportunities we're going to try, both technological and digital. We're going to prove them and we're going to apply them, and within the next 3 years we'll have to provide you better justification. But we need to start investing in the project right now to get that moving forward. So that actually changed the whole culture the project team works right now in. They understand for them getting that solution is must-have, otherwise project will not exist. It's the main trigger for the project. It's not now geology, it's not uncertainty, it's find the new value from using all these tools and adding that value to the base case in that project.
Another element, just adding on what you said there, and the picture you had about survival, and say, so is our survival fully by the digital or not? But I think, again, coming back to how we can utilize it, so we can be at the forefront and reaching out for those areas where sort of things are running extremely fast. But our challenge is, again, how can we apply it to our parts, etc. And coming back to the Google example I mentioned for Total, it's not to get more data. It's actually exactly how can we, with the data that's there, accelerate the workflows? How can we be better and smarter and make better solutions, but without necessarily acquiring more?
That's why I'm saying all these digital tools, there are so many up there we can use, but we need just to become smaller in the way we're using them and the way we're integrating them into new value drivers. I think that's our key challenge. And to be honest, it's all back to the basic understanding of this topic, right? We're all new to that. Still some even talking about this big data, machine learning, cognitive, we all have pretty much different understanding yet what that means in terms of the vocabulary, right? There is still education curve we need to go through before we will be able to play that on the proficient role.
Thank you very, very much. That draws this executive session to a close for today. We've received a lot of interest on the questions here. We've obviously filtered and censored. There was a lot of engagement. I think we've seen a couple of very distinct perspectives, starting with the regulatory, the emissions, and moving into technology and digital, all within this European context. So thank you very much to our distinguished panel. And Isabel?
Yes, just a closing word. So I think we've been through a journey this morning, very clear sense of what could be the challenge of our industry, and I think the early morning debates were very insightful. The perspective also from the regulator, and I think what we can take away is that we are having a shared vision of the challenges, as well as very interesting insights and through a Tristan presentation of what the exploration can bring still to the table, even in a constrained environment and mature environment like Europe. Yes, there are still opportunities there, especially focusing on the gas, and I think very interesting insights on what technology and digitalization can pave the way through putting this opportunity, making them real, to transform ourselves. So I want to thank the whole panel again. Thank you for your insight. Very, very interesting morning, and thank you for everything.